She had 1 year to live, 1 year to finally escape the family that never loved her, 1 year to stop pretending she was okay, 1 year to just breathe. So she did something nobody expected. She walked up to the most powerful, most untouchable man in the room. Of course, the most handsome and hot guy there. And she made him an offer. Marry me. I won't be a burden. I won't ask for love. I'll just disappear when the time comes. And somehow, he said yes. She never planned to feel anything. That was the whole point. But somewhere along the way, the man everyone feared started looking different to her. Less cold, less untouchable. Like maybe there was something underneath all that power that nobody had ever bothered to look for. And him? He was surrounded by people his entire life. People who wanted his title, his influence, his name. So why was it the quiet girl with no time left, no demands and no expectations, the one who kept catching his attention? So let me tell you exactly how all of this happened. The story starts at a ball. A familiar violin tune plays while the ladies gossip about each other's outfits. But the real focus of the night was Cayenne of Wintel. The second he appeared, people crowded around him. He was outstanding, and every girl hoped to win even a bit of his attention. Then everyone noticed a girl boldly walk up to the Duke and speak to him. Girls and boys looked at her with disapproval, wondering what family she came from to wear such an old-fashioned dress to a National Trust banquet. Cayenne looked at the gentle girl and couldn't take his eyes off her. She had on a pale pink dress with lace and stitched roses. She gave a small bow and introduced herself as Atisha Hines from the Viscounty of Hines. Turning to him, she said he likely hadn't heard of them since they were half Westerners. He paused to think. Cayenne of Wintel replied that he did know Lady Hines. He asked what she wanted to speak about, but she only lowered her gaze. Lady Hines apologized and asked if they could talk on the balcony. The people around them stared in surprise and muttered in annoyance. She explained it wasn't something to discuss here. They stepped out onto the balcony by the Duke family's garden. Atisha Hines still didn't know how to begin. She was scared he would refuse. After standing there a long time, her lips shook and tears ran from her eyes. Then, to the Duke's surprise, she said she might die soon. An awkward silence followed, broken only by crickets and faint music from the ball. She looked up, surprised by how calm he stayed. Atisha asked if his lordship had a mistress. She knew he might suspect her motives, but she had no other choice. Then she said she knew he had a secret child. Shocked, he told her to keep going. She apologized, saying she knew this was sudden, but she had to finish before her sister arrived. Looking away, she asked if he needed a false bride, a bride to fill that empty place. He considered her words. After hesitating, Atisha Hines said she could fill it, then disappear when the time came for his lordship and his secret mistress. She went on, saying he needed someone who wouldn't cause trouble. She would live quietly, as if she wasn't there, then leave. After her death, no one would pressure him to marry again. Cayenne of Wintel looked at her in disbelief and asked why he should listen. He said he doesn't treat people's lives like a game. He turned to go back to the ball, but she stopped him and asked if he'd heard the rumors that the Duke treasured his secret mistress. Lady Hines added that even if someone married him, she would get the title of Duchess, not the place of a wife. Every lady in the capital knew that. She cried out that wasn't that also playing with people's lives. The Duke turned back and said that's how aristocratic marriages work. Atisha answered that he knew that already, and that's why she was making this offer. She would die soon anyway. Lowering her head, she said he didn't need to trouble himself over her. He only had to marry her before she died, even if it was just for a year. She wanted to escape her father's wife and older sister, to escape the Hines family. She wanted to spend the rest of her life in peace, not in a home where everyone hated her. Atisha Hines bowed deeply and begged the Duke to take her as his wife. Take her north with him. Cayenne thought over her plea. Then he asked if it was true she was terminally ill. The girl said yes. The disease was already in its third stage. Still bent toward him, she waited while Cayenne of Wintel thought. Atisha Hines assumed he found it strange that a girl he barely knew had suddenly asked for this. She shut her eyes and said she had no regrets. Then the Duke called her name. She looked up a little. He said she was right. His family was pressuring him to marry, but he never wanted a real wife. After a short pause, Cayenne said her proposal wasn't a bad one. She looked up in shock. He added that feelings have no place in a contract marriage agreed to by both sides. Tears filled Atisha's eyes. She couldn't believe he had agreed. The Duke took a ring from his pocket and asked for her hand. She held it out, and he slid a diamond ring onto her finger. It shone in the moonlight, so lovely that she couldn't stop staring. The girl realized it carried the mark of the Duke of Wintel and fit her perfectly. She thanked him for the ring and for accepting the contract. Atisha Hines promised he would not regret this marriage. The night after the ball, another argument broke out at the Hines estate. Atisha Hines tried to tell her family she was sick, but forcing the words out was hard. Before she could begin, her stepmother, Madame Dorothea, cut her off. The woman said she was busy, and if it wasn't important, Atisha could deal with it herself. Atisha said the doctor had recently diagnosed her. She had hypermania syndrome. Tears ran down her face. Her half-sister, Larianne Hines, asked what kind of illness that was, and Atisha said it was incurable. Her stepmother asked if that was the disease where mana builds up inside the body, and in women, the body explodes. Atisha said yes. The doctor told her she was already in the 3rd stage and had only a year left. She burst into tears, asking what she was supposed to do now. Suddenly, Madame Dorothea shouted that she should hold on until her 20th birthday. Atisha looked up in confusion, and then her father spoke too. He said he was terrified because they didn't know when Atisha might explode. Then her stepsister jumped up, saying it was creepy and Atisha should stay in her room. What if she exploded right in front of her? The stepmother added that Atisha always called them over little things. The whole family agreed and went off to their rooms. They shut the hall doors behind them, leaving Atisha alone. She couldn't believe this was how they reacted to news of her death. Even her own father. Atisha had always thought she was the strange one. She remembered being shouted at and punished, as if everything was her fault. Because she was slow, they said she couldn't understand. Larianne used to yell at little Atisha until she obeyed. Atisha Hines always believed she was the reason she never got love. Her stepmother once told her to wear her stepsister's dress, saying brown hair wasn't worth a new one. But now Atisha understood it wasn't because of her. Her father, stepmother, and Larianne simply didn't like her. She realized she had no family. After telling them about her illness, she was no longer allowed to leave the mansion. One day, she overheard maids talking about the Duke searching for a wife. Another asked if they meant Cayenne of Wintel, the Duke of the North. One maid wondered about the Duchess, and the other said rumor had it the Duke of Wintel had a beloved mistress. Atisha thought that if death would come either way, she wanted to leave the Hines family first. She remembered that night on the veranda with the Duke and the promise she made, that he would never regret it. Atisha asked him to announce the wedding as soon as possible, while the National Trust banquet was still going. Cayenne of Wintel asked if she meant she wanted to go north right after the banquet ended. Looking down, she said yes, if possible, or was that too much? In noble custom, families equal to dukes usually announced an engagement first, then the wedding. If the Duke suddenly announced a wedding, people would surely stir up rumors about a rushed marriage. Atisha wasn't worried about her own honor, but about Duke Cayenne's. She said that if it was too sudden, he could announce the engagement first and explain everything to his mistress before anything else. The Duke took her hand and said that this was the Wintel family ring. He would do as she wished, Duchess of Wintel. She could hardly believe it. He asked if she understood what he'd said. She looked at him with shining eyes and told him how grateful she was. She had heard the Duke of the North was a ruthless, cruel war hero with a cold and frightening nature. She studied him closely. He was being so kind to her. Or was it only an act for the woman who would be his temporary duchess? Maybe it was pity, though that wasn't really the case. Still, whether it was kindness or pity didn't matter to her. Atisha said she'd like the announcement made on the last day of the banquet. The guests were still enjoying the night when the doors opened and Lady Hines walked in. At once, all eyes turned to her. Girls and men whispered, asking if she'd spoken to the Duke about marriage, but others quickly dismissed it. The first daughter, maybe, but not the second. On the first day of the banquet, the ladies had wondered why the first daughter of the Hines family was late, and then the palace doors opened. Lady Hines had arrived. She looked stunning, and everyone stared. As Larianne walked in with graceful steps, the men gaped and the women looked on with envy. Suddenly, she shouted her sister's name across the hall. She walked up and demanded to know how Atisha got her banquet invitation, saying that was why she was late. Then she snapped that it was only the first day anyway. So what was Atisha planning to do? Atisha answered that she came with an invitation written with their family name, so she hadn't stolen anything. Larianne Hines stepped in close and said loud enough for everyone to hear that everything belonging to the Hines family was hers. She grabbed Atisha's hands so hard that Atisha cried out and begged her to let go. Then Larianne whispered that Atisha was also a Hines, which meant she belonged to her. Hadn't she told her not to leave her room? Why come to a banquet she never cared about before? She clutched Atisha's head and Atisha forced back her tears. Larianne kept going, saying she bought her toys every day and even sang to her, all because she wouldn't hand over her doll, Atisha. That brought back a memory from childhood. Larianne once dressed her up, stood her before a mirror and asked if she looked pretty. Atisha couldn't stop staring at herself. She happily said yes and asked if she could show their mother and father. Larianne coldly asked why. Atisha said it was because her sister had made her beautiful, and it would be a waste if... Before she could finish, scissors snapped. Her long hair fell to the floor. Holding the scissors, Larianne asked if she still wanted to show herself to other people. Tears filled Atisha's eyes as she begged her not to say that. Larianne leaned in with a smile and told her, "You are my doll." Later, the papers were full of wild headlines. One Hines sister had burned a countess's tea table. Another article said Larianne Hines had ruined one more asset of the crown prince by tearing up a painting. Atisha knew Larianne was awful, But even she didn't know how far it went. If Larianne wanted something, she took it. Always. If she hated something, she destroyed it. At first, people judged her, but then that changed. Girls only laughed and said, "That's just Miss Larianne. That's how she is." They even looked forward to seeing what she would do next. No matter what she did, Larianne was still loved. She was beautiful, but no one made Atisha feel sicker than Larianne. Leaning close, Larianne whispered again that Atisha was her doll, hers alone. Then she dumped a bucket of cold water over her little sister. She said that was why no one else would ever get to see her. Soaked and humiliated, Atisha just sat there in silence. Atisha pushed the memory away. Now they were back in the hall, surrounded by a crowd. While Larianne kept tightening her grip, Atisha calmly asked, "Can't you play with dolls anymore? I wonder when that changed." That sent Larianne into a rage. She shouted for the whole hall to hear that yes, that was exactly the problem. Then she ordered Atisha to go back to the mansion at once, stay there, and not come out again. Usually Atisha would obey. She was timid, weak, and too scared to resist. But not this time. She tore herself free and shouted that she refused to go back. She said she was staying at the banquet. And if Larianne didn't want to see her, then Larianne could go home instead. Larianne stared in shock, but Atisha kept going. Didn't she hear her? She said Larianne should leave. Not just tonight either. Until the National Trust banquet ended, Atisha would come every single day. Whether Larianne went home or not was her own choice. Atisha turned to leave, but Larianne suddenly seized her shoulder and raised her hand to strike. Atisha shut her eyes, but the slap never came. She didn't understand. Larianne had definitely been about to hit her. When Atisha opened her eyes, Duke Cayenne of Wintel was beside her, gripping Larianne's wrist before the blow could land. He looked at Miss Larianne and asked what she thought she was doing. She froze, unable to answer. He coldly asked whether her family had taught her nothing. He said he couldn't believe they used violence like this. It was barbaric. Larianne couldn't understand why he was defending Atisha. She introduced herself and asked him to let go because he was hurting her. He released her, but warned there would not be a second chance. Larianne stared at him and asked what that meant. She wanted him to explain. Cayenne said that if she ever raised her hand against Lady Atisha Hines again, she would not escape punishment. Larianne was stunned. Then he turned to Atisha and asked if she was all right. She said she was fine. He asked if this happened often. Was that why she needed to be taken north? Atisha only lowered her eyes. His face went pale. "What horror," he said. Then Larianne suddenly shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. "North? Did you say north?" Atisha didn't know what was happening. The hall erupted at once as people started whispering that Miss Atisha and Duke Wintel were going north together. Larianne yelled at her sister, asking if she was really going north. She demanded that Tisha look at her and explain how she dared to leave. Atisha answered that it was a private matter between her and the Duke. Larianne snapped that it was a lie. Since when had Atisha even known Duke Wintel? The Duke cut her off and addressed her formally as Lady Hines. Larianne answered at once. He told her to forget this matter. Atisha was shocked. She hadn't expected Duke Cayenne to marry a woman from a family acting like this. Then Cayenne said he would not wait until the last day of the banquet. Atisha looked at him in surprise, and he said he was announcing their marriage now. Larianne went pale with rage, unable to believe what she heard. The Duke lifted Atisha's hand, showing the ring on her finger to everyone. He declared that Lady Atisha Hines would become his wife and take the name Wintel. Anyone who tried to stain her name would also be insulting him. Duke Cayenne of Wintel. He declared it loudly as his eternal promise before God. The crowd was stunned. Had she really just become engaged like this? Larianne stood there muttering that it was all a lie, that Tisha could never marry the Duke of Cayenne of Wintel. Atisha thought her sister's state was beyond normal. She was unwell. Atisha didn't know what to do if Larianne told everyone about her hypermania syndrome. If people learned the future Duchess of Wintel was terminally ill, the Duke's vassals might push him to choose another bride. She stepped closer and told her sister that once she became Duchess of Wintel, she was leaving home. Larianne moved even closer and said no. Tisha had made the wrong choice. She was sick, and this wasn't normal. She said something must be wrong with Tisha's head and asked if she wasn't right. Atisha asked what she meant. Larianne answered, "Oh, my poor little sister. You're foolish but sweet." She said she couldn't just stand by and watch. Tisha was supposed to stay in her room. It was dangerous. Then she called Atisha crazy. The Duke turned to Larianne Hines and said the only mad person here was her. Furious, she demanded to know what he said, and he repeated that Miss Atisha had clearly stated she would become the Duchess of Wintel. He added that attacking Atisha's name was the same as attacking his own. Then he ordered her out and pointed to the door. She shouted that this was impossible, but he raised his voice and told her again to get out of his sight. He said she could stay in the mansion and think about her behavior until the banquet ended and he and his future wife returned north. He said he didn't want to see her anymore and ordered her to leave. Larianne finally changed tactics, speaking to Tisha in a sweet voice and asking her to return to the mansion with her. She even said they could play with dolls together again. Atisha shrank back and went pale. The Duke noticed at once and said she didn't look well. Then Atisha looked away from her sister and up at the Duke with frightened eyes. Cayenne said she should rest and held out his hand, waiting for her choice. Atisha placed her hand in his and they left the hall together, leaving Larianne behind. Around them, people whispered in confusion about the Duke's decision and mocked Larianne. Larianne Hines was left alone in the middle of the hall, with nothing to do but grit her teeth and clench her fists. Later, Atisha sat in her room, thinking over everything that had happened. She never imagined her marriage would be announced in a single day. Her sister would surely tell their parents, and there were still 2 days left in the banquet. Atisha was terrified that her father would take out the whip again. Cayenne came to her and asked if she was all right. She was too nervous to even look at him. She said she had been too angry at her sister and might have caused him serious trouble. He replied that once they returned to the ballroom, people would stop talking about the fight and offer their blessings instead. He hoped she understood. Looking down, she quietly asked if he really meant that. The Duke added that, even if he had been a little blunt, Ms. Hines asked why. He said it was because he had rushed the wedding announcement. Atisha quickly denied that he had done anything wrong. He had helped her a lot, and she smiled. He thought about that word, helped. That wasn't why he had acted. He had done it to protect the honor of Wintel as its head. Atisha said the reason didn't matter. To her, he had still saved her. That was how she truly felt. The Duke asked why. Atisha said it was the first time anyone had ever put Larianne Hines in her place. She told him he could never understand what that felt like. After a moment, he said that he could, and that he would understand her. Then he asked what she planned to do next, and Atisha admitted she still didn't know. Atisha asked if she was supposed to go north right after the banquet, but he said no. He made it clear he meant her plans for tonight. The Duke asked if she would return to the Hines mansion or come with him. The thought of going home and facing what waited there made her freeze. Cayenne of Wintel asked if that meant she didn't want to stay with her family, and Atisha said yes. He then said that since they would soon leave for the north, she could stay at his villa in the capital. Since their engagement was already announced, no one could make a scandal out of them staying together for 2 days. The girl never expected the Duke to be this considerate. In her mind, the only thing she could ever do for him was die soon. She thanked him, but said she couldn't accept. Cayenne reminded her that she was his partner. He was offering because he feared she'd be hurt if she went back to the Hines mansion. Atisha was stunned. No one had ever worried about her before. Cayenne said that if she had decided, then she should come to his villa. Atisha agreed and thanked him again. He answered that she didn't need to thank him. He wasn't doing this to help her, but Miss Atisha cut in and said that even if that wasn't his reason, she was still being helped. That was why she wanted to thank him with all her heart. The Duke looked at her and understood how much this meant to her. Meanwhile, at the Hines estate, the family heard that Duke Cayenne of Wintel was going to marry their daughter. Her father leaped up and shouted that it was impossible. What kind of marriage could there be between Atisha and Duke Cayenne of Wintel? He couldn't understand what talent his daughter had that could make her a duchess. Madame Dorothea said there were rumors the Duke had a mistress, while Atisha's father kept yelling about how a prince could marry without the family's consent. Larianne Hines ran in and cried out, asking if Atisha was really going to get married. With tears in her eyes, she said she wanted Atisha brought back home. Her stepmother replied that if they sent Atisha away, what family would ever want her back? She was useless at everything. Their father ordered them to be quiet, then fell into thought, stroking his mustache. After thinking it over, he firmly said they should not stop the wedding. If she married the Duke of Wintel, they would gain powerful ties. They could expand their business all the way north and even build new rail lines there. Larianne strongly objected and screamed, "Dad!" loud enough for the whole house to hear. He told her to calm down and said this was a rare chance. Larianne kept shouting that Tisha would die soon because of hypermania syndrome. Then her mother stepped in. She asked how he could send away a child with that illness. What if something happened at a banquet? Then what? Their father replied that this meant they had to send her north as fast as possible. The two stared at him in shock, and Larianne asked what he meant. He said that if they moved fast enough, the incident would happen in the north, and they could pretend they knew nothing about her illness. Dorothea called it a great plan, since the doctor who diagnosed Atisha was their family doctor. If they kept him quiet, there would be nothing to fear. The father said Atisha didn't have much time left, so they needed to settle things with the Wintel family quickly and prepare everything. Larianne suddenly screamed that she didn't want that. She didn't want Atisha to become a Wintel. She wanted Tisha locked inside the mansion and begged her mother to make it happen. Instead, her mother asked her husband what he planned to do about the dowry, since marrying a duke would cost them a huge amount. The father smiled and said he had already worked it all out. The carriage carrying the duke and his future duchess rolled through the city that night. Atisha still couldn't believe she was riding in the same carriage as the duke she had only met yesterday. She was overwhelmed. For the first time in a long while, she felt free. She glanced at her future husband and quietly admired him. He seemed deep in thought, and she found herself thinking he really was a handsome duke. People often called Cayenne the second most handsome man in the empire, but Atisha thought that was wrong. The emperor had to come first out of respect, but to her, the duke was the most handsome. The duke and his majesty had been close since they were young because the emperor had grown up in the north, not the capital, back when he was still a prince. They had even fought together, which made Atisha wonder if beautiful people always stayed close to each other. Her thoughts broke when Duke Cayenne called her name. At once, she wondered if she had been staring too obviously. He asked if she handled cold weather well, since the north was very harsh. He added that she already knew that, but it wasn't a good place for someone in poor health. Atisha admitted she didn't handle cold well, but said she could endure anything, so he shouldn't worry. Especially on the trip north, she wouldn't be a burden to him. Cayenne said that once they left for the north, it would be hard to meet people from the capital again. He asked if there was a close friend she wanted to contact, but she said she had none. Whenever she tried speaking with others her age, her sister would step in and cut the conversation short, then spread rumors behind her back. Atisha thought he was asking things no one had ever asked her before. Maybe he really did care. Maybe he was warning her that life in the north would be hard and she might someday want to leave. Still, when their marriage was announced, she never thought of running away, even once. Cayenne then asked if he could ask one last question. There was something he needed to know. She agreed, and he asked whether she wanted to cut ties with the Hines family, or if she wanted revenge, or maybe an apology. She started to think it over. Just then, the carriage hit a rock and lurched hard, nearly tipping over. Atisha shut her eyes, and the next moment she found herself in the Duke's arms. He asked if she was all right, but the shock left her speechless. She quickly began apologizing, but he stopped her and said it was the driver's fault, not hers. He added that once they reached the mansion, he would deal with him. Atisha thought his voice sounded cold, but his arms were warm. She told him it was the road, not the driver, and that he shouldn't punish someone over a rock. The Duke looked at her and said she was too kind. Still, the one at fault had to answer for it and be properly punished. For some reason, Atisha felt he wasn't really talking about the driver. She remembered what he had said about the Hines family's place. Being this close, she could feel his breath, and it seemed to her that she finally sensed what he was feeling. Heat, like burning revenge hidden under a cold stare. She looked at him and wondered who he wanted revenge on. Then she admitted she wasn't sure. Atisha still hadn't been able to do much. Leaving the Hines family had already taken all her courage, and she had never really thought about revenge. Atisha Wintel wondered what she truly wanted from that family. She didn't have the answer yet, but she knew one thing. Everything would be different now. She told the Duke she needed more time to think. For now, she only wanted to cut all ties with them. He stayed silent, and Atisha quickly asked if that answer wasn't enough. The Duke let her go and said it was more than enough. Late that night, the carriage reached Cayenne of Wintel's grand villa. Cayenne offered his hand, and after she stepped down, Atisha looked up and froze in shock. She asked if this huge villa really belonged to him. It was even bigger than the Hines estate. The Duke glanced at the house and said the Emperor had given it to him. Atisha asked if he meant His Majesty, and Cayenne explained that the Emperor gave him the house so he would visit the capital more often. Atisha was amazed and said a mansion like this shouldn't be left empty. The Duke noted that Miss Atisha seemed to like it, and she said of course she did. Atisha Hines stepped inside the huge home, where servants were already waiting. Cayenne of Wintel said that if she liked the villa that much, she could have it. He would give it to her. She stared at him in disbelief. Then she asked again, was he really giving her a mansion this large, when the Emperor himself had gifted him? He said he had no real use for it, but he also couldn't simply throw away a gift from His Majesty. So giving it to his future Duchess was reason enough. Atisha realized it was a wedding gift. She thought it might be normal for a duke to give such a gift, and after she died, it would return to him anyway. He said he would hand over the ownership papers tomorrow. They would stay there until they left for the north, but after that, the house would be hers alone. Atisha decided to accept it. She would just let the Duke do as he pleased. She thought it was better to stay quiet and not argue. With a smile, she said she would accept it gratefully. As Atisha Wintel walked on, she still couldn't believe that such a huge mansion would belong to her. She thought it was strange that the Duke didn't seem impressed by a place like this at all. Cayenne of Wintel was always expressionless. People said he could cut off a man's head without even blinking. He was known as a cruel monster of the battlefield, a cold-blooded man. But the Cayenne Atisha Hines had seen wasn't like that. He was hard to read, yes, but not as cold as the rumors claimed. To her, it seemed people misunderstood him because he hid his thoughts and often sounded blunt. She starts to feel that if you really know him, he's actually very thoughtful. After all, from the start, he protected her from her sister. Maybe it's because she's going to be his fake duchess, or because she'll die soon. Still, Duke Cayenne of Wintel seems like a truly good man to her. He says a servant will take her to her room, and she agrees. Then he says they'll meet tomorrow, and they wish each other good night. Once in her room, Atisha notices the balcony right away and steps outside to take it in. It all feels so beautiful. More than just a mansion. It feels like even this small piece of heaven is hers. The next morning, she wakes up late, with the sun already high. A maid named Marin knocks and says she brought water for washing, asking to come in. Atisha tells her to enter, and Marin rushes in carrying a bowl of water. She tells Atisha to wash quickly and head to the living room. Atisha asks what's going on. Marin explains that the Duke has called in the capital's top dressmaker, jeweler, and shoemaker. They're all waiting for Miss Atisha, leaving her completely confused. Atisha walks down the hall and peeks through the right door. Inside sit three finely dressed people: Vivian the dressmaker, Lucy the jeweler, and the shoemaker, Nigel. Atisha remembers that these were the same people who used to shower Larianne with gifts. The maid asks if she's all right. Larianne was always the center of attention because of her daily drama. She became a muse for designers and constantly ordered Atisha around, go to Vivian for her dress, then stop by Nigel for her shoes. And Vivian would snap that the dress wasn't finished, and Atisha had come at the wrong time. The more Atisha ran errands, the more they looked down on her, treating her like her sister's maid. But today, she has to act as the Duchess of Wintel. She can't let them make her feel small, so she grabs the door handle. When she walks in, Atisha smiles and says it's been a long time, then asks how they've been. All three freeze. Clearly, they haven't heard about the wedding yet. Vivian and Lucy whisper to each other, wondering why she's here so early. And Lucy guesses she might be the rumored mistress. Atisha calms herself, realizing the news still hasn't reached them. She turns to them and says she was told they were invited by Duke Cayenne. Then she asks what job the Duke gave them. The room goes quiet, so she asks again for someone to answer. Since none of them dare speak, she decides to push them. Atisha says that if no one has anything to say, she'll just leave. Vivian quickly stops her and says they received a request from the Duke. He asked for a dress, jewelry, and shoes for the founding banquet. They know the order came from the Duke, but Atisha calmly picks up a teacup and says it seems he prepared a surprise. The three stare at her and ask what she means. Smiling, she explains that this time, the items are for her. Vivian can hardly believe it. Atisha tells them she'll need everything by this evening to attend the second day of the founding banquet. Since she'll be wearing them, they must be masterpieces worthy of the Wintel name. Nigel says that if she needs them tonight, they simply don't have enough time. Atisha asks if they don't use mana to work it into their materials. She looks at them with confidence and says she's sure they can manage. Vivian bursts out, saying they can't spend all their mana on one order. If they do, they won't be able to take other work for 3 months, and their salons would have to close. Atisha asks in surprise if the Duke's request really means so little to them. Then she reminds herself not to show her nerves. She has to stay in control because she's meant to act like the Duchess. The more attention she pulls onto herself, the more useful she is to the Duke. So she tells herself to stay bold and briefly wonders if she should copy Larianne. She remembers Larianne yelling, "If I tell you to work, then work. If I say, start now, then start." Atisha pushes the thought away. No matter what, she doesn't want to become her sister. She says she understands. Vivian is refusing the dress order. Then she looks at Lucy and Nigel and asks about them. Lucy stares at her, still unable to believe she could really be the Duke's mistress. She wonders what the Duke was thinking choosing someone this plain, while Nigel suspects Atisha just got a chance to stay in the mansion for a while and is bluffing. Unable to hold back, Vivian asks Miss Hines what exactly her relationship with the Duke is. Atisha coolly replies that the question is rude. Do they always ask clients about private matters? Vivian is ready to explode, but then they hear the Duke's voice calling for Lady Atisha. He stops at the door and says he wants to come in. Atisha tells him he may enter. The three instantly stand up, stiff with shock. When he enters, the designers greet him at once. Cayenne says he's a little late because he was checking how the land rights worked. As it turns out, ownership of the villa also includes the nearby land. He steps up to Atisha and asks her to place her hand here. She does, and the Duke declares that from now on, she owns this villa. Lucy is stunned. This is far too much for a mere mistress. Then she notices the ring on Atisha's finger and realizes this girl isn't a mistress at all, but the future Duchess. Lucy steps forward and bows, saying she's honored by the chance. If they trust her, she'll make a masterpiece worthy of Wintel's name. Nigel adds that even if he has to use every material he saved, he'll make the finest shoes in the country. Vivian drops to her knees, begging forgiveness for her rude behavior and promising the best dress she can make. Cayenne of Wintel says it's all for his wife's happiness, but for some reason, Miss Atisha doesn't seem pleased. He turns to her and says she doesn't have to put up with them. There are plenty of other designers, and he can send these three away. Atisha quickly tells him to wait. No matter how they treated her, if word gets out that these designers lost Duke Cayenne's trust, they'll have to shut down their salons. She says that's punishment enough. Then she walks up to the Duke and says he spent time choosing them, so things will be fine even if he keeps them here. He asks if she's sure. Atisha says yes. He came to the mansion empty-handed, and she does need something to wear. She's visited their salons before, so they can be trusted with the work. The Duke answers that as she wishes. If she wants other designers instead, she may do as she likes. Atisha sincerely thanks him for trusting her. Cayenne says he'll be away for a bit and return after lunch. She says she understands. Once the door shuts, she turns back to the designers. With a bright smile, she says, "Dress, jewelry, shoes. Where do we begin?" Meanwhile, the Duke walks through the garden of what is now his wife's villa, thinking over her words. "Even if you didn't mean to help me, you still did. So I should thank you with all my heart." He realizes she was right. He claimed he wouldn't help her. Yet he clearly has. Whether it was the rushed wedding announcement, inviting her to the mansion, or calling those designers, all of it could pass as normal treatment for the future Duchess of Wintel. And beyond that, maybe she truly does have reason to thank him. He doesn't want her learning the meaning of that sign until the very end. If she ever figured out why he was helping her, he quickly pushes the thought aside. He promises himself they will never use the nameplate. A carriage is waiting near the mansion. When he gets in, he finds his assistant beside a stack of papers. Val de Prame says he already reviewed them as the Duke ordered. He hands them over, saying it's an investigation report on the Hines family and Lady Atisha Hines. The Duke already knows some of it: a remarried viscount, a favored stepsister, and Atisha, frail, alone, and seen as ordinary. He asks about the three designers and what connection they had to Lady Atisha. Val de Prame says they were all close to Larianne Hines. Whenever Miss Larianne visited their salons, she used Lady Atisha like a servant. To humiliate her, she sent her again and again to pick up orders that weren't even ready. Some days, she was flat out thrown out of the salons. Cayenne of Wintel thinks of Atisha Hines, and what shocks him most is her calmness. Her life was full of contempt and abuse, yet as he thinks back on their talk, he remembers her saying, "What do I really want from this family? I don't even have time to think about it." The Duke figures she must want something. It just may take time for her to know what. Once she becomes the Duchess of Wintel, he's sure she can make everyone who wronged her apologize. He also thinks there's a chance she may want harsh revenge. She could strip Hines of his title or force those relatives, now commoners, to serve her, so no one would ever dare look down on her again. She would have the power to make them kneel. But then he remembered she said she hadn't even thought that far. How could that be? Because she's dying, Cayenne realized. If he had only a year left, he would make very different choices. He kept reading her report. If she'd known about those designers beforehand, she would have picked others. Then he told the driver to stop. Val de Prame didn't understand why. Cayenne said he had to go to the Imperial Palace at once. It had been a long time since he'd seen him. Meanwhile, Atisha sat by the window, watching the sunset in her new outfit. The maid came over and asked if she wanted more tea. Atisha said no. Too much liquid would upset her stomach. She wondered where the Duke had gone. If she asked the servants, they'd only say they didn't know. He had left that morning and still hadn't come back. They were supposed to attend the founding banquet together. And now she suddenly thought, maybe he went to his mistress. If he brought a mistress to the capital, that would explain why the servants stayed quiet. Still, his private life was none of her business. This was only a contract marriage with no feelings, just as she'd agreed. Without noticing, she fell asleep. The maid's voice woke her, saying the Duke had returned. She went downstairs and found him staring at a painting. "Welcome back." Cayenne apologized for returning later than expected, then suddenly noticed how stunning she looked in her new clothes. She seemed to glow. The designers had done great work, and one thought crossed his mind. She was beautiful. He asked if she'd been waiting for him. She said yes, but not for long. Atisha thanked him for the dress, jewelry, and shoes. She said she'd never had such lovely things before and was overjoyed. Cayenne suddenly looked surprised, and she couldn't tell why. He thought she was happy. So did it not matter who made them? The man quickly said the outfit suited her well, then walked off the other way. Atisha couldn't understand him. Did he not like the dress? Stopping by the doors, he said he'd find her different designers in the north. She agreed, though to her it only confirmed he disliked the dress. On the second day of the banquet for the founding of the state, the hall was crowded. One guest mentioned there had been quite a stir yesterday, it seemed. A woman said it involved Lady Hines. Her daughter had told her. Another man said if he'd known, he would have come yesterday. The nobles who missed the spectacle all wanted to know the same thing. Would Miss Atisha become the Duchess of Wintel? Wasn't the Duke supposed to be untouchable, like a flower on a snowy peak? Someone agreed. You wouldn't even dare climb up there. And even if you did, you'd never survive. A woman scoffed that Atisha was weak, spineless, and not even pretty. To her, Atisha Hines was the most insignificant girl alive. Then Atisha Hines's father burst into the banquet, loudly greeting everyone and calling it a wonderful evening. The guests were stunned. Had Viscount Hines come to celebrate his daughter? They exchanged looks. Larianne clearly hadn't known about the wedding. And Viscount Hines? One woman stepped up to congratulate him, saying it looked like there was a big celebration at his house. The Viscount smiled and said of course, the Duke had taken a liking to Atisha. A baron couldn't help asking if he truly believed Miss Atisha would become a duchess. Her father answered that the Duke seemed to have fallen for Atisha at first sight. No matter how powerful he was still young. Then he asked, wasn't it wonderful when someone was in the bloom of youth? The guests were shocked. So the rumors were true. This ruthless Duke had fallen in love. The Viscount went on, saying Cayenne of Wintel cherished his daughter. They couldn't live without each other, and one look around told him everyone was buying it. The Baron asked why Miss Larianne had reacted so badly yesterday. The father smiled and said his eldest daughter was a bit immature. He'd hidden the wedding so she wouldn't envy her younger sister. She knew nothing, and the nobles believed him. Then he added that there was only one thing worrying him. The Baron asked what could possibly worry him now that everything was settled. The Viscount sighed and said the Duke refused to take a single coin of dowry. The crowd was stunned. Would he really take nothing at all? A baroness said the wedding announcement had shocked her, though she had noticed the Duke often defended Miss Atisha. Others whispered that the Wintels probably didn't care about such a small dowry anyway. The Viscount cut in and asked if this was what love looked like. The man said the Duke must believe money couldn't buy love. The guests could hardly believe it. Were they really talking about that same Duke? The merciless monster? The Grand Duke of the North? The man whose sword left corpses behind wherever it went? Viscount Hines looked over their stunned faces in delight. Everything was going exactly how he wanted. He went on, saying even so, the Hines family couldn't let its honor suffer. How could they send a daughter away with no dowry at all? But the Duke was too stubborn. People rushed to comfort him, saying that if Duke Cayenne insisted, what else could he do? Forcing it on him might seem insulting. The Viscount thanked God inside. Now the Duke couldn't go against public opinion. He could always claim the money should be invested in northern trade instead of called a dowry. He praised his own clever plan, but then someone announced the arrival of Duke Cayenne Wintel and Lady Atisha Hines. The girl the nobles had once treated like a worthless wildflower had arrived, now looking like the brightest jewel in the room. One man told the others to look at the mana flowing through her clothes and jewelry. A woman answered that if he'd spent that much on Miss Atisha, then he really must be in love. Seeing the couple, Viscount Hines spread his arms and rushed toward them. He said he was so happy Atisha was finally marrying, though also sad. It was hard to let go of the daughter he'd raised. He asked if she felt the same, then told her to come hug her daddy. But he had always been harsh to Atisha. He was a terrible father who never smiled at her. That gentle side was only ever shown to Larianne. Atisha had been sure that once he learned of the wedding, he'd drag her back to the Hines mansion and stop everything. Would a man like him really celebrate her marriage? She pushed the thought away. He couldn't fool her. Her father had never loved her. Atisha shoved him back. She said he looked far too happy. The Viscount asked what she meant. Of course he was happy his daughter was getting married. Atisha asked if he wasn't really happy because she was marrying Duke Cayenne. He froze. She had always been obedient, so why was she acting like this? Atisha pressed on. If not that, then was he happy because she was finally leaving the house? She told him he'd always tried to drive her away and wanted her to die. Viscount Hines laughed it off, claiming he didn't remember ever saying that and told her not to joke. He asked why she was upsetting her father like this and told her to stop and come hug him. Then he grabbed her shoulder and pulled her closer. He asked if she wanted everyone to find out she had hypermania syndrome. If that truth came out, what would happen to her wedding? Atisha had never expected her father to threaten her like this. He kept going, saying the Duke would end up with serious problems too. Atisha tried to answer, but he cut her off. He said he didn't want any trouble. He wanted a close connection with the Wintels, so Atisha needed to stop making a scene. Her father ordered her to hurry up and pretend she'd come over to hug him. Atisha looked at him and thought that tomorrow was the banquet's last day. The day after, she'd leave for the north. She could endure him for just 2 more days. Like always, if she obeyed her father one more time. Her future husband's voice cut through her thoughts. The Duke ordered the Viscount to stop. The man went pale and quickly tried to explain that it wasn't what it looked like. Cayenne of Wintel asked what exactly he thought he was doing. The Viscount at once begged for forgiveness. He said he was just so happy to see his daughter that he'd forgotten to greet him properly. The man pleaded again, asking the Duke to be generous for his daughter's sake since they would soon be family. Cayenne saw him for what he was, a snob who bullied the weak but bowed to the strong. He turned to Atisha, but the Viscount cut in again, claiming he and his daughter needed to discuss the wedding. More exactly, the dowry. He thought he could force the Duke to bend. Instead, Cayenne asked Atisha if she still wanted to cut ties with the Hines family. She answered that her decision would never change. Her father watched from the side, confused about what they were saying, and tried to distract the Duke. He started saying Duke Cayenne didn't need to worry about anything related to the Hines family's marriage duties. But the Viscount was rattled. Had the Duke really heard what he'd told those nobles? It seemed impossible. Yet the Duke calmly repeated that he would not accept a dowry. If that's the case, he says they should set the wedding date soon. The Duke asks what part of his words was hard to understand. The Hines family doesn't need to worry about anything. Their marriage has nothing to do with them. The Viscount goes still. Cayenne of Wintel adds that as of today, Lady Atisha will give up the Hines name. From now on, she will have no ties to the Hines family. The Viscount asks what that means. Atisha is his daughter. How could he do that without her family's approval? How dare he? Then the room is interrupted by the announcement of Emperor Lassius Ignaven. He walks in, saying it's loud and nearly everyone is drunk. He goes to Cayenne, complaining that he was the last to hear about the wedding, and asks how this all happened. Cayenne tells His Majesty to handle his business first, but Lassius says he won't let him off that easily. Cayenne tells him to lower his voice. Atisha's father cuts in, saying he's honored to meet the Emperor and introducing himself as Viscount Hines. Lassius answers with a mocking apology. So this is the man who cast his own daughter out of the family. The Viscount asks what he means. The Emperor laughs and says it seems Duke Cayenne hasn't explained it yet. Cayenne has granted Atisha Hines ownership of part of the capital territory. And as everyone knows, owning capital land comes with a title. Atisha's father asks again in confusion. Lassius says he can explain it more clearly. People who inherit new land receive a new surname, unlike nobles who simply inherit family property. So Miss Atisha is no longer part of the Hines family. The Emperor smiles at Cayenne and gives him a thumbs up. Cayenne steps toward the Viscount and asks if he understands now. The Viscount is too stunned to even move. The Duke pulls out a tablet and says, Lady Atisha is now a baroness. That's why she no longer belongs to the Hines family. So the Wintels should not be treated like relatives of House Hines. He leans in closer and tells the Viscount not to get any foolish ideas. Just because Atisha, and here getting married, he should not even think about threatening her. The Viscount is lost. The Duke is standing right in front of him, making it clear he wants him gone. And behind him stands the Emperor, who approved cutting Atisha from the family. Around them, the gathered nobles stare in shock. The Viscount has no idea what to do. Then suddenly he thinks of something. He rushes at Atisha and demands to know if she planned all this. What did she tell the Duke and the Emperor? Then he drops to the Duke's feet and says this isn't what it looks like. He claims he doesn't know what his daughter said about the Hines family, but none of it is true. In his house, daughters were simply raised strictly. Not every family does things the same way. It was only meant to make them into proper women. Then he turns back to Atisha, yelling that they fed her and raised her, and this is how she repays them. She just abandoned her parents. Is that really what they taught her? Atisha can't answer. The accusation leaves a lump in her throat. Viscount Hines calls it unfair and begs the Duke to hear him out. Atisha finally speaks, telling her father she never said anything bad about the family. Everyone turns to her. She says she is leaving the family. Exactly what he always wanted. The Viscount stares, asking what she's saying. Atisha steps closer and tells him to remember what happened 7 years ago. She was 13 then, riding home with him in a carriage. He raised his hand at her, and she fell hard. He called her pathetic and said the robbers should have killed or kidnapped her. He even said not seeing her felt like a relief. Then the Viscount grabbed the door handle and opened it. A strong wind rushed in, and Atisha covered her face. She screamed at him, but he only told her to get out. He said she was going to die soon anyway, so she might as well disappear. And then he pushed her. With tears in her eyes, Atisha says she will never forget that day. If the coachman hadn't stopped the carriage, she would have been crushed. They should answer for that. The Viscount brushes it off, saying it happened long ago. In the end, she was fine, and the family doctor made sure no scars were left. Atisha denies it. She still has a scar from that day. No matter how much it hurt, she says she should have left home back then. She may be years late, but now she's leaving for good, and she asks him never to look for her again. The Duke turns to Viscount Hines and asks if this is what he calls strict parenting. The man can't even meet his eyes and scrambles for an excuse. Cayenne of Wintel warns him not to even think about trying anything. The Viscount grows furious, convinced that Duke Cayenne, Emperor Ignavan, and even Atisha are all plotting against him and House Hines. By now, the crowd is already buzzing. Everyone is learning what kind of man Viscount Hines really is. One woman says it was never about love or a dowry. She knew something was wrong the moment the Duke spoke. A baron says that if he were the Viscount, he'd hide in his house forever. What a disgrace. Only then does the Viscount notice the crowd. Humiliated, he rushes for the front doors. The Emperor claps at the whole scene and asks for the music to start again. Atisha and Cayenne remain silent for a moment until Atisha speaks first. She smiles and asks if it's really true that she'll become a baroness. He says yes. It was done to completely cut her ties to the Hines family. He explains that at noon today, he transferred the land attached to the mansion. Those lands fall under the Emperor's direct rule. Since the ownership is temporary, the title will vanish after some time. By then, they'll already be in the north, so it won't matter. Atisha thinks about how far ahead he planned everything. He made it all work in just one day. It's amazing that he can do that while still ruling the huge lands of the north. She bows deeply and thanks him from the heart for helping her. He says he's glad he could help, though he worried he might have done the wrong thing. Atisha quickly denies that and tells him she is truly grateful. To her, he is a savior. She's happy he doesn't brush off her thanks this time. Cayenne adds that the mansion truly is hers, and that won't change. She looks at him and asks why he's being so kind. To him, she's only supposed to be his fake duchess. He can't answer and only clenches his fists. Atisha smiles, thinking that this is just like the Duke. He doesn't know how to show his feelings. She knows the rumors people spread about Duke Cayenne, but with her, he has always been gentle and thoughtful. The man says he thinks Lady Atisha misunderstands something. Before he can finish, the Emperor calls out that he finally found him. Lassius says it's late, but congratulations on the wedding. He points out that Cayenne announced a marriage without a notary and already gave her a mansion and land. Atisha notices the Duke looks annoyed. The Emperor goes on, saying he thought Cayenne would stay alone forever, but suddenly he decided to marry. He jokes that this can't be the same Duke of Wintel he knows. Cayenne tells him to step back and stop talking nonsense. Emperor Ignavan turns to Lady Atisha and says he'll leave Cayenne to her. Then he gives her a wedding gift. If she sends a message with it, it will reach him right away. If she ever needs help, she can call on him. Atisha thanks His Majesty, clearly surprised. He says the title certificate and appointment letter will arrive by tomorrow. For now, they should enjoy the banquet. Atisha thinks it is a wonderful gift. Afraid she might drop it, she puts it around her neck. The Duke walks over and studies the pendant. Then he says they should probably return to the mansion early and asks if she minds. Atisha agrees and admits she's a little tired too. Cayenne asks if she's feeling unwell. She says no, just worn out from everything that happened. In the end, she repeats that she's only tired. It really has been a long day. Tomorrow is the last day of the banquet, and after that she'll leave for the north. Cayenne takes her hand, and the two of them leave the banquet for the mansion. Meanwhile, back at the Hines mansion, Viscount Hines returns home furious. Larianne Hines runs up and asks how it went. Where is Atisha? Did he bring her back? His wife asks if he discussed the dowry with Duke Cayenne. He snaps and tells them both to shut up. Madame Dorothea protests, asking why he's yelling at them. The Viscount kicks a chair and shouts that everything went wrong. He slaps his own face and says it's over, they're finished. His daughter asks what he means by that. He drops onto the sofa and says he has no idea how Atisha wrapped Duke Cayenne around her finger, but she got land and a title. She's completely cut ties with the Hines family. Larianne is stunned. Atisha is no longer a Hines. She says Cayenne was supposed to take Atisha north for work or something like that. Atisha has to come back home. She's just her doll. 10 years earlier, Larianne first met Atisha when their parents introduced them. Atisha had been shy, peeking out from behind her father. Later, while Larianne was walking down the hallway, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Atisha, then sharply asked what she wanted. Atisha turned to Lari and said she was the prettiest person in the world. She was amazing. Everyone loved her, and Atisha loved her too. Larianne found that adorable and wished she could keep Atisha tied to her forever. She didn't want Atisha going out, meeting friends, or falling for anyone else. Atisha should stay with her, forever. She would belong only to her forever. Then Atisha got hypermania syndrome, and Larianne was terrified of losing her. She felt forced to lock her in a room. But now, was Atisha leaving for good? Would she never see her again? Larianne decided to act. She would bring Atisha back and ordered the carriage prepared. Madame Dorothea tried to stop her, but Larianne ignored her. She only thought she should have done this sooner. Only she could bring Atisha back, and she wouldn't let her go again, even if she had to die beside her. Her mother yelled that she couldn't go. The Duke had ordered her to stay, and disobeying him would be dangerous. Larianne snapped that none of that mattered now and screamed for them to let her go. Dorothea ordered the servants to take her to her room, and Larianne fought to break free. Her mother only warned them to be careful. If Larianne got hurt, they'd be punished. She ordered them to lock Larianne up until the banquet ended and make sure she couldn't get out. That evening, the Duke and Atisha returned, and a maid came over, saying she would show Atisha to her room. Atisha followed, but soon noticed Marin had gone the wrong way. She stopped her and asked why, since her room was on the other side. The maid explained that her new bedroom had just been prepared. From now on, this would be her room. After all, she was the Duchess now. Atisha was still a little shocked by that. She blushed, and Cayenne of Wintel told her that if she felt uneasy, she could still use the old room. Atisha said they had prepared this one for her, so she couldn't refuse. Duke Cayenne walked down the hall toward his room, with Marin and Atisha behind him. Atisha noticed and guessed their rooms were side by side. They stopped at a large set of doors, and the maid said this was Atisha's room now. Atisha blushed harder, confused by the two doors. Then the Duke went through the next one, leaving her stunned. She stared at it and asked Marin if that meant the other door led to Duke Cayenne's room. The maid cut in and said yes. Atisha felt uneasy having her room so close to his, but reminded herself she was a duchess now and had to get used to it. She gathered her courage and went inside, then lit up at how spotless and beautiful the room was. Atisha realized she was only this nervous because it was right next to his. It was also much bigger than she expected. Marin quickly showed her around: the bed, the wardrobe, and a small study space. When she started explaining more, Atisha stopped her and said she didn't need every detail. She smiled and reminded her they were leaving for the north tomorrow. What mattered more now was help getting undressed. Soon Atisha had taken off the heavy dress and slipped into a hot bath. Marin asked if she would keep the pendant on, and Atisha said yes. She had the maid remove the rest of her jewelry too, except for the ring. Marin took the dress and wished Lady Atisha good night. Atisha enjoyed the quiet, resting alone in her luxurious room. All she could think was how soft and warm the bed was. It even smelled nice. The guest room had been comfortable, but this room felt safe, almost like a hug. Then Atisha suddenly opened her eyes and realized she was thinking about the Duke. What was wrong with her? She couldn't really like him. Could she? Because of Larry Ann Hines, she had no friends growing up. She still struggled to speak normally with people, even now. So she didn't understand why she was this drawn to someone when she knew almost nothing about love. Still, she kept thinking about the Duke. Was it because he was kind, gentle, soft, and unlike anyone she had ever met? Atisha slowly realized this might really be love. But what if she truly liked him? He had helped her, and she was wearing his family ring. He was sleeping in the room across from hers, and she was becoming a real duchess. Even so, she reminded herself she was only here to stand in for the Duke's mistress. A fake. Too restless to sleep, she got up and walked across the room. There, she noticed a large curtain on the wall and wondered why it was there. Maybe it was hiding a painting, she thought. But when she pulled it aside, she found a doorknob. Not understanding why there was a door there, she opened it slightly. She had no idea it would lead to the Duke's room. Duke Cayenne was lying in bed with his outer clothes off. Atisha felt completely foolish when he asked what she wanted. She quickly apologized, saying she didn't know the rooms were connected. Cayenne said that's how rooms for married couples are usually built. Atisha then remembered the maid had tried to explain that. She apologized again and turned to leave, but the Duke stopped her. He said there was something he wanted to discuss and got out of bed to come closer. Atisha froze, not knowing where to look. Her face turned bright red as he came near. She didn't even notice how close he had gotten. Atisha tried to step back, but caught her foot on her nightdress and realized she was falling. Cayenne reacted at once and caught her, pulling her against his warm body. He asked if she was all right, and Atisha said yes. He steadied her, lifting her slightly as he held her close. She didn't know what was happening, and when she looked up, he seemed deep in thought. When he said her name, she turned even redder. He held her so close she was standing on her toes. Atisha pulled back a little and asked what was going on. Cayenne touched the doorknob and explained that her side had the same lock. If it shut, it couldn't be opened from this side, so she had nothing to worry about. Atisha thanked him, though she couldn't believe that's what he'd been thinking about. Then the Duke asked her to excuse him, and Atisha didn't know what he meant. A moment later, he picked her up in his arms, startling her. Cayenne explained it was the easiest way to check where she'd hurt herself. He gently set the fragile girl on his bed. Then, Cayenne of Wintel knelt in front of her to inspect her leg. Atisha was flustered seeing the Duke on his knees before her. It felt so unreal that she thought she had to be dreaming. Cayenne asked her to lift her dress, and Atisha made him repeat himself. He calmly explained he needed to see her ankle, and it would be rude to raise the skirt himself. Atisha couldn't believe the Duke wanted to examine her himself. She never could have imagined him kneeling before her while she lifted her skirt. Slowly, Atisha raised her nightdress and held out her leg to the Duke. He examined it carefully, and the silence made her even more embarrassed. So she asked what he had wanted to talk about. Cayenne lowered her leg and said it was about the maid Marin. When Atisha asked again, he explained that Marin wanted to go north with her. It seemed Marin wished to keep serving her, and Atisha was surprised to hear it. The north was far away. If Marin truly wanted that, Atisha had no objection, but returning would be hard. Cayenne said Marin had no relatives, so leaving the capital wouldn't trouble her. Atisha thought there was one thing, but soon she would die. And then, the Duke said the sprain wasn't serious and would feel better in a day or two. Atisha figured he knew best because of his battlefield experience. Cayenne said their family doctor was in the north, so they'd need someone else for now, and he would send for one at once. Atisha quickly refused, saying it was late and not that serious. He was about to argue, but she insisted again that she was really fine. The Duke warned that the ankle might swell more by tomorrow. Holding her leg, he asked again if she still didn't want a doctor. Atisha turned completely red, while he stayed focused on her ankle. He added that she might not be able to dance at tomorrow's banquet, then asked once more about the doctor. Atisha again tried to convince him she'd be fine by morning. Then Cayenne noticed the pendant around her neck and asked if it was a gift from His Highness. Atisha said yes, and explained it was important, so she kept it on. He asked if she even wore it to sleep, and she answered, surprised, that she did. Suddenly, she jumped up and said she was fine now, so she should return to her room. Cayenne said it was already dawn, but all right. If anything troubled her, she could come to him anytime. Atisha said she would, told him not to worry, and wished him good night. As soon as she got back to her room, she hid under the blanket in embarrassment. Atisha was so flustered, she thought she wouldn't sleep at all that night. On the third and final day, the banquet ended without any problems. Atisha's leg was fine, and she enjoyed her last day in the capital. The Duke said they would ride by carriage to Laxon, then use teleportation to reach the north. Maureen came along for the long trip, and Atisha felt happy about this new start, but after a while, she noticed they still had not left. Then a blonde girl came to the carriage and greeted her. She said it was nice to meet her and introduced herself as Judith. She climbed in beside the Duke and told Atisha to just call her Dith. Then she asked Cayenne if he had been waiting for her. Atisha kept thinking about that introduction. She had only given her first name. A noblewoman normally would not introduce herself that way, so maybe she was a commoner. But no commoner would casually climb into the Duke's carriage. If she were a maid, she would be dressed for it. So that did not fit either. Atisha was about to say her name was Atisha Hines, but then she remembered the Emperor's words. He had said she would soon be a Wintel anyway, and no longer needed her old last name. It was better to use her mother's surname. So she introduced herself as Atisha L. and said she was a baroness. The Duke apologized for not warning her about their travel companion. He said he still could not tell her who Judith was. If people learned she had come to the capital, it would cause a stir. Atisha said she understood. He had to hide his mistress. There was no point feeling upset over it. She had only just met the Duke anyway. There was nothing between them. The Duke said that was why they should leave before it was too late. He grew tense and clenched his fists as the carriage finally started moving. As they traveled on, Atisha kept thinking how strange it was to meet the woman from all those rumors. To her, the two of them seemed perfect together. Judith looked kind and easy to like. Atisha wondered if that was what made the Duke fall for her. The mood between them felt warm, but whenever she joined in, they both went quiet. Atisha shut her eyes for a moment, and Cayenne quickly asked if she was all right. He said they could stop and rest if she felt unwell. She quickly said she was fine and there was no need to stop. Marin placed a pillow under Lady Atisha, and she thanked her. Atisha noticed Judith staring at her in disbelief. Before long, the carriage reached the small town of Laxon. The Duke said they had arrived and could step out. Atisha glanced nervously toward the Duke's beautiful mistress. Marin noticed and asked if she felt sick from the long ride. Atisha said she was fine and took the Duke's hand, but as she stepped down, she stumbled and fell right into his arms again. He told her to watch her step, and Atisha could not believe it had happened again. Their faces were so close that, in her head, she panicked and wondered what he was doing. Dith was right there. She might get mad. Yet Atisha still did not want to let go of his hand. Then she came back to her senses, looked past him, and saw a huge, glowing building. She asked if that was the teleport site, and Cayenne said yes. His assistant came over and said the teleport was ready, but there was something the Duke needed to handle first. Cayenne asked if it was urgent. The man said it was about the investigation the Duke had ordered, then quietly glanced at Atisha. Cayenne asked Atisha to wait there for a bit, and she told him not to worry. Cayenne of Wintel left with his assistant, leaving Atisha alone with Judith. Atisha heard Dith laugh softly and looked at her in confusion. Judith asked if Cayenne was hard to understand. Then she answered her own question. No one ever knows what he's thinking, and that's normal. She said he had been the same since childhood and still had not changed, so Atisha should not take it personally. Atisha tried to respond, but Judith cut in and said no one could take him away from her. After a while, the Duke returned and asked how long they had been waiting. His assistant said Miss Judith could teleport first with him and Maid Marin. Judith gave a strained smile and agreed. The assistant said they would go first. Cayenne nodded and said they would meet again in the north. The assistant, the maid, and Judith stepped onto the teleporter and vanished a moment later. Atisha watched in amazement. She had never seen teleportation before. Cayenne of Wintel said it was their turn now and asked her to come. But then he stopped and turned to her, saying he wanted to tell her something before they teleported. Atisha asked what it was, and Cayenne said he wanted to explain the truth about Judith. He had not been able to talk about their connection in the carriage because other people were there. Only a few people could know, and Atisha said she understood. She added that he did not even have to explain. She understood the situation, but Cayenne pressed on. Atisha asked if she had it right. Was Miss Judith the real reason they were getting married? Was she just a fake duchess so he could stay with the woman he loved? The Duke said she had completely misunderstood, and he wanted to tell her the truth. But first, he asked her to keep it secret once she heard it. Cayenne of Wintel said Judith was Wintel's weak point, which was why she had to be hidden. Atisha could not understand how Judith could be Wintel's weak point, or why that meant hiding her. That sounded far too serious for simply hiding a mistress. Maybe he still was not telling her everything. He was usually hard to read, but now she felt even more confused. He only got as far as saying Judith was theirs when he noticed Atisha was suddenly unwell. He asked what was wrong, but she could not answer. Tears ran down her cheeks, and her heart pounded wildly. Atisha L. covered her mouth, trying to calm herself. Then hypermana syndrome hit. She dropped to her knees, and the Duke rushed to her side. She fell into hysterics, and he did not know how to help. After a while, Atisha slowly began to calm down. She started apologizing, but he told her there was no need. He pulled her close, held her tightly, and gently stroked her hair. The Duke told her not to be afraid and kept reassuring her that everything would be all right. Half an hour later, Atisha finally lifted herself from his lap and said she felt better. She had stayed there a long time, quietly enjoying his embrace. She said the pain had passed, though she worried he might think she was pretending. Cayenne asked what she was talking about. She was clearly not fine. Atisha insisted it was true. The first attacks did not last long. She said the doctors warned that the condition gets worse later, but for now it was still bearable. The Duke replied that if she meant the syndrome, he knew what it was. And no, she was not fine at all. He asked if this was her first attack, and she said yes. Cayenne said that meant she still had some time before the next one. Atisha L. said that seemed right. According to the doctor, the early gaps between attacks were long, but then they got shorter and shorter near the end. Until then, she still had time to live her life. He listened, then said he understood, but Atisha once again tried to tell him she was fine. The Duke said she should rest for a day, and they would go north tomorrow instead. Teleport mana could affect her body. Atisha pointed out that everyone else had already gone and only they were left. Cayenne said that was fine. In fact, it was better this way. If someone had seen them, things could have become more complicated. Atisha looked down, knowing he was right. The Duke added that since he did not know what else might happen, it was better not to call anyone. At last, he suggested they spend the day together. Atisha could hardly believe it. He was used to going without attendance after so much time on the battlefield, but Atisha had no maid with her here, so he worried she might be uncomfortable. She said she did not mind. He was genuinely concerned for her, and the pain was gone now. Atisha thanked him for caring so much. She told him he was a kind, good person. Cayenne answered that he was not as good as she thought, but to Atisha, he was the kindest person she had ever met. She did not think she would ever meet another man like him. Then Atisha suggested they go shopping. The street was full of merchants shouting that their goods were the cheapest. Atisha finally learned what it felt like to walk around without a servant. Cayenne apologized for the inconvenience, but she said she was actually enjoying it. The Duke was surprised, and she explained that she had always wanted to try something like this at least once. To wander an unfamiliar street, step into a random shop, and buy things she had never seen before. Suddenly, Cayenne of Wintel stopped, and Atisha asked what was wrong. He pointed to a nearby shop and asked if she wanted to go in. She lit up at once. The Duke said he had noticed she was interested in it from the start. If she wanted, they could take a look inside. Atisha flushed in embarrassment. Had he really noticed that? Cayenne added that she seemed to like sweets too. Atisha said that was not the only reason. Larianne liked sweets, so they often visited places like that, but her parents never bought her anything, and the thought made her sad. The Duke walked to the shop, opened the door, and invited her in. Without hesitating, Atisha stepped inside. She had never imagined she would get to do this. The shopkeeper greeted them and asked if they were looking for anything special. Atisha was thrilled by the huge display of sweets. Duke Cayenne asked if she liked anything there. Atisha asked him to give her a moment. There was so much to look at. She could barely take it all in. Her eyes darted across the display, and she remembered her father asking if she still wanted to buy anything. He told her to ask her sister for some, just one bucket, and not to be greedy. So Atisha asked Larianne Hines if she would share, but her sister snapped that they were all hers, and Atisha could buy her own. Then Madame Dorothea stepped in. She coldly asked if Atisha was really trying to take sweets from dear Larianne Hines, and said she should be thankful to her father. When Atisha tried to speak, her stepmother cut her off and said she'd get nothing. Back in the shop, Atisha asked the seller to show her the sweets she pointed at. She also asked for the one in front and the little rabbit. Only then did Cayenne of Wintel realize it was a rabbit, and the seller happily agreed. Atisha wanted to choose what she liked too, like she was getting back the childhood she lost. Then she asked if they had the sweets only made for the foundation banquet. The seller asked if she meant the gold candies and said they still had some. Atisha lit up and said she wanted those too. Cayenne paused, remembering that she had just called him kind and sweet. Before this, he had lived only for himself and his goals. He never cared about the people around him or showed feelings he thought were pointless. He crushed every obstacle in his way. So how could someone like that be sweet or kind? Yet Atisha was this happy over a few sweets. To her, even a little kindness made someone seem good. Cayenne shut his eyes for a moment, and Atisha noticed. She asked if he was all right. He only asked whether she was done choosing. Embarrassed, she said yes, and wondered if she had picked too much. He told her they could come back another time if they got the chance. Then he dropped a bag of coins on the counter and said to keep the change. The seller stared when he opened it, then quickly thanked them and asked them to visit again. Atisha left thrilled, hugging her chocolate rabbit tight. Later, as they walked through the busy evening streets, Atisha asked Cayenne to stop. He looked at her, confused, and she offered him the gold candies. She said people believe if you eat one and make a wish, it comes true. Her own wish had been to leave the Hines family, so she didn't have one anymore. That was why she thought he should try one. Cayenne said he didn't need it and told her to eat them herself. The girl hesitated. She worried she was acting too childish and apologized. Cayenne said he just didn't like sweets. Atisha was about to answer when someone cut in. The voice said the young lady looked like she had a wish to make. A wish. She added that the young lady would soon be taking a long journey, and she didn't seem to be from here either. Atisha had no idea how the woman guessed that. The old woman explained that she was a fortune teller at the restaurant nearby, and if they ate there, she would read their futures. She asked if they wanted to know their fate. Cayenne stayed silent. Atisha suggested that they eat there for dinner, and he agreed. So they went into the restaurant. Cayenne said he would stay, and Atisha said she would too. The old woman set her crystal ball on the table and began. She started with Atisha, saying that by breaking what cannot be broken, she saw a bright future. There would be hardship first, but also happiness and peace. Once she got through those trials, she would find her happiness. Atisha was glad to hear it, and then the old woman turned to Cayenne's future. But suddenly, something went wrong. The ball crackled with strange lightning. One bolt struck the old woman in the eye, and she screamed through the whole restaurant. She cried out about endless darkness, pain, war, revenge, loneliness, and a sword piercing the sun and sky. Then the ball dropped and rolled away while the fortune teller bent over in pain. Atisha asked if she was okay, and the woman gasped that his fate was terrifying. She begged forgiveness and ran from the restaurant. Atisha couldn't stop wondering what she had seen. Cayenne told her it probably wasn't a real prophecy, so she shouldn't worry. He said it was just a trick anyone could do and told her to look at the ball. That kind was used by scammers, which shocked Atisha. He added that a real fortune teller wouldn't work in a place like this, then suggested they finish eating and leave. Atisha still felt uneasy. If it was all fake, then were the good things she heard fake too? Did Cayenne of Wintel have secrets he hadn't told her? He was the Duke of the North, a war hero, and the man who left his mistress to save his future wife. Yet everything she knew was rumor or half-truth. Now she realized she knew almost nothing about him. What kind of man was he? What had his life been like? What did he think about? What did he want? Atisha wanted to know it all. She tried to start eating, so first she prayed. It felt like all her wishes had already come true. She had once thought she only needed to wait for death, but the longer she stayed near him, the more she wanted to know him. She reached for one of the candies, and Cayenne asked if she hadn't just said she had no wishes left. Smiling awkwardly, Atisha unwrapped it. She said maybe she still had one after all. That felt strange, but Cayenne let out a breath and said it wasn't strange at all. Her cheeks turned red. Atisha put the gold candy in her mouth and found it delicious. It was sweeter than she expected, and she quietly wished for that wish to come true. The next day, Atisha and Duke Cayenne arrived at the portal that would take them north. Standing before it, Atisha said she hoped the people there wouldn't worry. Cayenne replied that she didn't need to worry. He had already contacted them. Someone would meet them. A bright flash made Atisha shut her eyes, and when she opened them, they were in the snowy north. She could hardly believe the beauty around her. It was cold and beautiful. This was the land of Wintel. Now that she had left the Hines mansion, she finally felt alive again. No one here would torment Atisha, not Larry-Ann Hines, and not her parents. She never had to go back to the house she had fought so hard to escape. Cayenne called to Lady Atisha, saying it was cold and asking her to come closer. He paused for a second. Yesterday, she had been honestly happy over a chocolate rabbit. Now she looked just as purely happy. Maybe because she was in the north, or maybe because she was far from the Hines house. Then he heard his aide, Val Deprame, behind him. He turned and saw Judith hurrying over, complaining that he was late and that she had been waiting for him. She urged him to get to the mansion quickly because the banquet preparations were done. Cayenne pushed her away and asked what banquet she meant. Judith said a lady had arranged one after hearing news of his marriage. He asked if she meant his mother, and Judith said the guests would be arriving soon. Watching from the side, Atisha was shocked to realize she felt jealous, but she quickly told herself she had no reason to be. Of course, the Duke had Judith. Everything was fine. Atisha had only ever been a fake duchess. Still, she was glad she had been able to walk part of this road with him. It must feel nice for him to have people waiting here. Was it normal to be jealous of Judith? Even so, Atisha didn't regret her wish. Cayenne pulled her from her thoughts by calling her name, and she looked at him. He said he had heard his mother was holding a banquet today. Atisha asked again, and he explained they were supposed to have one more day to prepare, but they had arrived late and now there was little time. He added that Atisha should attend too and asked if she minded. Looking down, she said she would. She thought she would soon be gone anyway. In the end, only the Duke and Judith would remain here, and Atisha felt she should be thankful to Judith. If Cayenne hadn't needed a fake duchess, Atisha might still be trapped at the Hines estate, so she declared that she would attend the banquet as the future Duchess of Wintel. Val de Prame reminded the Duke they needed to leave for the banquet at once. Cayenne agreed and asked if anything had happened while he was gone. Val de Prame said he had followed every order. Cayenne told him to come see him after the banquet because he had another task for him. Val de Prame bowed and said as he wished. Then they headed for the carriage, and Atisha was already eager to see the Wintel estate. The carriage set off through the snowy forest road. Atisha looked out the window, amazed by the view. Then she turned to Cayenne and asked what mountain that was. He didn't understand at first. He looked where she pointed, to a massive peak in the distance. Cayenne of Wintel said she would understand once they got closer. Atisha looked again and froze in surprise. It wasn't a mountain at all. It was the Wintel estate. Soon the carriage reached the castle, and Cayenne opened the door, offering Lady Atisha his hand. She reached out, but Judith took it instead, thanking Duke Cayenne. He immediately pulled his hand back and sharply called her by her full name. Judith flushed. She said she had to go and mentioned she had bought a new dress. Atisha noticed the lady seemed to care for Judith well and even gave her gifts sometimes. Then Judith turned to Baroness Atisha and said they would meet again at the banquet. Atisha blushed a little and stepped out of the carriage. She asked the Duke if Dith had also been invited to the banquet. He said his mother had given Dith special permission to attend. That made Atisha feel down. His mother was treating her son's mistress with care. Even after hearing him call Dith Wintel's weakness, Atisha still couldn't understand him. As they headed into the estate, Cayenne turned to her. He told her he'd come get her before the banquet, and Atisha agreed. Servants offered to lead her to her room, and she went with them. On the way, she kept thinking how strange this was. A banquet shouldn't be arranged this fast. Even one of Larianne's small parties took at least a week to prepare. Then Atisha realized why. Maybe it was because the Duke had brought home his bride and announced the wedding at once. His mother was probably upset, and this sudden banquet was her way of showing concern. Atisha L. had no real name in high society, and the Duke, a man with great status, was about to marry someone no one knew. At the banquet, his mother likely wanted to see what kind of person Atisha really was. Atisha had never been to an event like this before. She paused, then remembered Larianne offering to teach her about high society. Atisha let out a breath. No matter what, she couldn't mess up tonight. At the banquet, guests whispered about Atisha Hines, the woman set to become the Duchess of Wintel. None of them had heard of her before. Others corrected them. She wasn't Hines anymore, but Baroness Atisha L., a title granted by the Emperor. Still, they wondered how a baroness could marry a duke. It all seemed odd, especially since he rarely came to the capital. He had gone to war 3 years ago, so they doubted his meeting with the Baroness was just chance. Everyone wanted the full story and wondered who knew it. Countess Monmad turned to Madame Cyrillez, saying she must know more than the rest. Cyrillez had once been a famous lady in the capital, and after her marriage, she came to rule northern society. But she only leaned in and said she didn't know what the Countess meant. The banquet went on, though Dance Monmad was getting nervous. Mrs. Cyrillez said they were all mistaken. Today's banquet was for the Duke's marriage. It had been arranged to share that joy with everyone. She hoped no one would spoil the celebration by chasing rumors. Just then, the arrival of Duke Cayenne and Baroness Atisha L. was announced. The guests moved aside, opening a path to Madame Cyrillez. Cayenne of Wintel bowed and politely asked after his mother's health. Atisha bowed too, introduced herself, and said she was pleased to meet her. Mrs. Cyrillez looked at her with cold contempt, and Atisha felt her anger right away. She glanced at the Duke, but he stood there calm, wearing a faint smile. In her head, she asked if everything was really fine, but then his mother stepped closer. The woman greeted her and said she had heard Atisha was going to marry her son. Atisha smiled and answered that the Duke had accepted her proposal. Mrs. Cyrillez didn't understand what she meant by that, so Atisha explained that she had proposed first, and the Duke had said yes. The older woman reacted at once, calling it unbelievable, and Atisha knew she had said the wrong thing. She quickly turned to look at the Duke. His expression hadn't changed. He was still smiling. Atisha couldn't understand why. Maybe if his mother believed her, she could stay. She forced herself to think fast. Atisha clenched her fists. She had to prove herself. A person in the spotlight draws every eye and every word reaches the whole room. So Atisha L. held out her hand and asked the lady for the honor of the first dance. Usually the first dance is with family, and the second is with a lover. So that invitation was her way of saying she wanted to become part of the family. Even if she got refused, she could still dance with the Duke, and that would pull attention away from his mistress. The lady answered that it was quite a bold offer. Atisha braced herself for a rejection while Cyrillez seemed to weigh the request. Then Judith suddenly entered the hall, and every eye shifted to her. The guests immediately started whispering that she might be the Duke of Cayenne's mistress. They couldn't figure out why she was there and assumed someone important had invited her. Dith walked up to Miss Cirilese and thanked her for the invitation. The lady replied that she was glad to see Judith there, and Atisha realized Mrs. Cirilese had invited her herself. Instead of answering Atisha's offer to dance, she welcomed Judith first. Atisha felt crushed. This was supposed to be a celebration of the marriage. The Duke had cut her ties to the Hines family, and in return, she was meant to act as a fake duchess. That had been their deal. Yet now his mother was greeting Judith before everyone, so Judith could stay close to the Duke. It really was the perfect move. Did he even need a fake duchess anymore? Everyone was staring at Atisha like she didn't belong, like she was some far-off island no one would ever approach. Maybe her role really ended here. She felt stupid for hoping something as small as candy could grant her wish. The bitterness hurt. Then the Duke turned to his mother. He said she had invited Judith without thinking how painful that would be for Atisha. He told her she should explain herself to the guests, but the lady said she could not. Cayenne pressed her again, asking her to clear up the misunderstanding. Atisha was shocked that he defended her, and when she looked at him, he only held her closer. The guests watched closely, waiting to see what would happen. At last, the lady said maybe an explanation really was needed. She said she had raised this child like her own. Though Dith was a commoner, she saw her as a daughter, which was why she was here. Atisha was stunned, and Cirilese went on. When she heard Cayenne had decided to marry, she felt Dith should be invited too. Cayenne was her son, Judith her adopted daughter, so of course family should gather for such a happy day. The room was stunned. They had believed Judith was his lover, not his sister. Then Cirilese turned to Baroness Atisha, apologized if this had upset her, and quietly added that she was happy about Cayenne's marriage. Atisha could hardly believe it. The woman said she had been so excited she couldn't sleep, so she arranged the banquet at once. Cayenne had also arrived a day later than planned, which worried her even more. In the end, she apologized again and admitted she had acted without thinking it through. Then Cirilese held out her hand to Atisha L, inviting her to dance. Atisha was relieved that the lady wasn't angry after all. Mrs. Cirilese said she was truly grateful that Atisha wanted to marry her son. She would be happy to dance with her, even if it wasn't the first dance. The two stepped into the center of the hall. The guests hadn't expected any of this. Now that the Duke's supposed mistress was revealed as Mrs. Cirilese's adopted daughter, they knew better than to meddle. Mrs. Cirilese and Atisha L began the banquet's first dance. As they danced, the lady asked Atisha to take good care of her only son. She promised to do all she could to help with the wedding. Atisha could ask her for anything. The girl thanked her and said she would remember that. Cirilese looked embarrassed when Atisha called her mistress and said she could call her mother instead. Atisha was startled. The lady quickly said she wasn't forcing her to do anything. She had waited a long time for Cayenne to find a worthy woman and finally marry. She had tried hard to choose a proper bride for him, even laying out 5 portraits of possible matches on the table. She told him they were all good choices, but he rejected them before she could even finish. That hurt her, since he didn't bother to really look. Cayenne simply said he had work to do and walked out. Cirilese lowered her head and said she only wanted him to find someone he could truly relax with. She took Atisha L's hands and looked straight at her. Then she admitted she hoped Atisha could become that person for Cayenne, the one who would support him for the rest of his life. Atisha hoped so too. Then it was time for the second dance, and Duke Cayenne came to her. He said he thought his mother had only been shy. In fact, she seemed even happier about this marriage than he was. The man bowed and offered his hand, making Atisha blush. The second dance was usually for lovers, and the two began to dance. Atisha admitted she was surprised. She had expected his mother to be strict. She never thought she'd be treated so kindly, and the Duke said his mother was only like that with family. That made Atisha realize Mrs. Cirilese was kind to her because she believed she would become her son's bride. If the marriage turned out to be fake, she would never forgive the lie. Atisha shut her eyes for a moment and told herself that could not happen. When the dance ended, she gave the guests a small bow. Soon new rumors spread through the hall about the commoner Mrs. Cirilese had taken in and raised. People repeated what she'd said and mocked the idea, acting as if Judith were some pet. They even praised her beauty and joked that they'd like to raise a commoner like that too. But everyone knew what came from taking in someone like her. One woman said Judith clearly didn't know her place and was only causing trouble for Duke Cayenne, especially with all the rumors that she was his mistress. No one knows the truth. Maybe she fooled the Duke and became his mistress. The girl stood there crying. Miss Monmad walked over and asked what happened, but all she heard was the Duke's name. When Dith turned 12, Mrs. Cirilese adopted her. After that, she grew up in the castle with Cayenne, almost like his sister. Cayenne was raised as a noble, but Judith could never truly stand beside him because she wasn't born one. They were called brother and sister, but while he became the ruler of the north, Dith stayed shut away in the castle. Cayenne's heart was like frozen land. No one could warm it. Before this, he had no interest in any girl, so Judith believed that meant she would be the only one by his side. She used to believe that, But then Atisha changed everything. Mrs. Cyrillese invited her to the banquet, and Judith thought this was finally the moment to show everyone she and Cayenne were bound as brother and sister. But neither the first dance nor the second became hers. Monmad told her to look, but Judith just stood there, frozen. Tears were close to falling as she thought about how long she had stayed by Cayenne's side. Monmad found it amusing that the commoner ignored her. When Judith still said nothing, Mrs. Monmad snapped, called it insolence, and asked if Dith had gone deaf. Then she flipped her fan and struck Judith across the face with all her strength. She screamed, asking how dare Judith ignore her, and whether she really thought she could call herself the Duke's daughter. Dith held her stinging cheek, still not understanding why she had been hit. She cried out for Cayenne and Mrs. Cyrillese, but Monmad was already raising her hand again, shouting that Judith was a disgrace. She ordered her to kneel and beg for forgiveness at once. Then a man suddenly stepped in front of Judith, shielding her. He told her to calm down and reminded her this was supposed to be a joyful day. They were in Wintel Castle at the Duke's wedding banquet. Was she really going to beat Mrs. Cyrillise's adopted daughter here of all places? Judith couldn't believe it when the Marquis of Hexion stood up for her. Even she was stunned. He said Monmad didn't need to punish Judith. He would handle it himself. Mrs. Monmad had no reply, so she stayed quiet. Hexion leaned in and said he was only worried she might ruin her lovely fan. Then he grabbed Judith's hand and pulled her down the corridor. She had no idea what was going on. Then the Marquis stopped, turned to her, and said she should go back. Dith froze, confused by what he meant. Looking at him up close, she thought he was striking. Red eyes and ash-colored hair. If Duke Cayenne looked like he had walked out of a fairy tale, then the Marquis of Hexion looked like a demon made to tempt people. Judith asked again, and he told her there was a place waiting for her. She answered that Mrs. Cyrillese had invited her, and this was the first banquet of her life. Hexion lifted her chin and asked why she wore that face at the Duke's wedding feast. He said she looked pathetic, especially after not answering when called. Judith shoved his hand away and shouted that she already knew that. Hexion said he didn't know why the lady had invited her. Then he added, it was sad, but someone like her couldn't stay here. Judith asked if it was all because she was a commoner, and Hexion burst out laughing. She demanded to know what was so funny, and he told her she wasn't ready for any of this. If she was Mrs. Cyrillese's adopted daughter, then she needed to act the part. And if she was Cayenne's mistress, she had to play that role too. He told her she couldn't handle this and asked if she had seen the nobles at the banquet. That was a battlefield, so it would be better for her to turn back. Dith started yelling, demanding he tell her how to become Cayenne's lover, how to become a duchess. Back at the banquet, Atisha LA was meeting new ladies. One welcomed her to the north and invited her to visit their estate sometime. Another asked her to come to a tea party, and Atisha gladly said she would. Her face felt hot, like she had drunk too much wine. It had been a long day. She had thought Judith was the Duke's mistress, but learned she was actually the lady's adopted daughter and Cayenne's sister. Usually nobles, especially someone as important as the Duke, don't get involved with commoners. Now she understood why Duke Cayenne had spoken that way about Judith. She remembered him saying Judith was Wintel's weakness, something that had to be hidden. Atisha wondered why Mrs. Cyrillese chose to raise her. Was there something she still didn't know? There had to be. After the banquet, Mrs. Cyrillese came to the Baroness and told her she had done well. Atisha thanked her and called her madam. The lady almost said she could call her mother, then suddenly stopped. Atisha asked if she really meant it, but the lady brushed it off and told her to forget it. She hadn't expected strict Mrs. Cyrillese to show such a gentle side. Flustered, Atisha apologized and shyly called her mom. Cyrillese froze. Then Atisha thanked her again, this time calling her mother. She looked at the lady and thought anyone might mistake that face for anger, but really she was just embarrassed. And Atisha found it adorable. Atisha said she was truly happy that her mother had welcomed her so warmly. Cyrillese replied that things weren't perfect. The banquet had been arranged in a rush, so there were flaws. Atisha said she would try to become a good daughter-in-law and repay her kindness. Then she added that the lady could call her something else too, not Baroness, even if she still wasn't used to the title. She took her mother's hand. The lady asked what she should call her, and Atisha answered that she was her daughter. My daughter. Cyrillese looked at her sternly, but clearly flustered. She pulled her hand away, then quickly realized it and started apologizing. When she saw Cayenne coming over, she said she had to go. There was still so much to do. They had to prepare for the wedding, along with the bride's dress and jewelry. Those treasures had been passed down through the Wintel family for generations, so everything had to be handled carefully. The wedding had to be grand enough to be remembered for years. Cyrillese added that it was late and suggested they talk more over tea tomorrow. She was so embarrassed, and each time Atisha saw it, she felt even more touched. At last, Cyrillese called her daughter and hurried out of the hall. The Duke joked that now his daughter-in-law had appeared, they had stopped paying attention to their son. Atisha reassured him and said his mother simply cared a lot about him. He studied her for a moment and said he had planned to show her around the castle after the banquet, but it seemed she had too much to drink. Atisha agreed. So the Duke said he would escort her to her room, which made Atisha blush. He offered his hand and asked her to come with him. Kyan explained that the mansion was huge and easy to get lost in, so she shouldn't walk around alone and should take a maid with her. Atisha said she understood and realized how much she still had to learn. Duke Kyan told her they were now in the main building, the heart of the Wintel Palace. There were smaller wings to the east and west, called the Snow Palace and the Dark Palace. Atisha was surprised by such strange names. Kyan said his parents lived in the Snow Palace. Atisha guessed Judith lived in the Dark Palace. The man replied that the Dark Wing was empty for now. The heir of Wintel would live there. Judith stayed in a tower outside the castle called the Star Tower. Duke Kyan said Atisha's bedroom was on the 3rd floor of the main palace. The whole floor belonged to her, and she could explore it freely. Atisha could hardly believe it. Kyan corrected himself. Properly speaking, it was the Duke and Duchess's floor. They stopped at a huge door, and Kyan said this was her bedroom. Atisha was shocked to see there was only one entrance. Back in the capital, her room had been across from his. So did this room split inside, or were they really meant to share one bedroom? She was almost afraid to know. Kyan said that now he had shown her the way, he would return to his office. He still had reports to read about what happened in the north while he was gone. Wishing her a good rest, he left. She was left alone with that one unanswered question. Meanwhile, Judith brought Hexion to the Star Tower where she lived. She invited him in, and the Marquis asked if he was really allowed to be there. Judith lowered her eyes and said no one else was around. He laughed and said it seemed Mrs. Cyrillès had raised her in a greenhouse. If she wanted to act like a lady of high society, she couldn't behave this way. Hexion added that she had never received a noble's education, even though she used only the finest things. When he reached for her belongings, Dith cried out that Mrs. Cyrillès had given them to her and told him not to touch them so carelessly. He looked at her dress and asked if the mistress had given her that too. Judith smiled and said yes. She loved the dress. Marquis Hexion replied that, as expected, she understood nothing. Dith shouted, asking what he meant. He asked if she had ever heard the story of the Imperial Canary. Judith only stared at him, confused, and the Marquis began. One day, the first emperor found a bird with golden feathers in the mountains. He fell in love with the canary at once and took it in. He gave it a name, fed it, and cared for it like a treasure. Judith asked where he was going with this. The man told her not to interrupt and to listen to the rest. Because the emperor treasured the canary, he treated it with special care. The servants treated her with extra care, afraid anything might happen to her. The bird grew prettier and prettier, until one day something went wrong. The emperor wanted to see her fly, so he opened the cage and set her free. But she couldn't spread her wings. She only chirped. Hexion said that happened because she had been caged and pampered too long. Her legs had grown weak, and her eyesight had gotten worse. A hawk had become nothing more than a canary that could only sing. Judith turned to him and asked if he meant she was like that bird. He said she caught on fast. She was lucky Mrs. Cyrillès had noticed her, but that luck turned her into a bird trapped in a fancy cage. Judith shouted that it wasn't true. Lady Cyrillès saw her as a daughter. Hexion asked if that was really so. Then why had she been treated that way at the banquet, along with her pet dog? Judith answered that those women were just cruel, but the Marquis said their behavior had exposed the truth. In the end, she was in a sad and laughable position. Dith lowered her head, remembering all the kind moments she had shared with Mrs. Cyrillès. Then she thought about the cage she was living in now. Maybe Hexion was right, and she really was just an imperial canary. He said maybe Mrs. Cyrillès raised her out of curiosity, pity, or kindness. That didn't matter. What mattered was that Judith was treated like a pet, so if she wanted out of this harsh reality, she needed to follow his advice. At the same time, Duke Cayenne returned to the room he shared with Atisha and took off his jacket. He looked at the sleeping Atisha and felt strangely moved. After taking off his shirt, he sat beside her and stared at her sleeping face. Atisha had gained the power to crush the people who hurt her. Cayenne lifted her dress slightly so he could see her legs. He wondered why she never took revenge on the Hines family. All his own pain had come from a deep darkness. His happy childhood vanished before he even realized it. Cayenne of Wintel had been forced to accept sudden tragedy. He wanted to escape that awful reality. He didn't want any part of it. To keep living and make things work, he had to cut himself off from the past. The people who caused his suffering. He wanted revenge. He wanted their heads, burn their bodies, crush their ashes. His revenge would be merciless. Atisha was also trying to sever all ties to her past. But unlike him, she didn't seem to want revenge, and that tormented him. Wasn't she angry? Was that fair? Didn't she want to kill them all? Feeling his touch, Atisha opened her eyes. She had no idea what was going on. Cayenne let go of her dress and told her everything was fine, so she should go back to sleep. He thought nothing had changed. The wedding still had to happen in a month because everything would go according to plan. The next morning, Mrs. Cirillese and Atisha had tea together. The woman asked if her dress had been torn. Atisha said yes. Maybe she ripped it in her sleep. Her mother-in-law told her not to worry. She'd buy another one. Atisha had no idea when it happened. As usual, she had dreamed about the Duke. Then Mrs. Cirillese mentioned that she had also given Atisha a letter. Atisha asked what it was, and Mrs. Cirillese said it was an invitation from Marquis Hexion to a tea party for Atisha and Dith. At yesterday's banquet, Marquis Hexion had spoken with Lady Monmouth and Dith. Even so, he was still surrounded by all kinds of scandalous rumors, so she worried Dith might get dragged into trouble. Atisha thought the lady truly cared about her adopted daughter. She found herself wishing she had parents like that, parents who would share nice things with her and worry if something happened to her. Atisha felt jealous. Then she heard her mother-in-law's voice and snapped back to attention. She asked what she had said, and the lady replied that she planned to accept the invitation. Then she asked about Atisha. Would she come too? Atisha thought it over. She said it was an honor, but she still wasn't used to northern banquets. With all the rumors going around, she felt uneasy, but she smiled and said she would join them next time. The woman got flustered by that smile and asked her not to smile at her like that. After tea, Atisha explored her new home with 2 maids. She had to admit the lady was charming too. In the library, Atisha was amazed by its size. Then she noticed a door at the far end and wondered where it led. One maid told her it was the Duke's office and he should be inside. Just then, the door opened and Val de Prame, the Duke's aide, stepped out. He greeted Atisha, then invited her in, saying the Duke was waiting for her. She asked if he meant her, and he wondered if she hadn't come because of the gift. Hearing the Duke had prepared a gift, Atisha wasn't shy at all. When she entered, she found the office filled with beautiful jewelry. One set caught her eye at once, and Cayenne asked if she liked it. Atisha said she didn't need such expensive jewels, but Cayenne called them an apology and told her not to feel burdened. She asked what he was apologizing for. He had nothing to be sorry about. Cayenne said it was because the dress had been torn. Atisha blushed and said that was her fault, but then he calmly said he had torn it. She froze in disbelief. Looking at him in shock, she heard him repeat that he had ripped her dress last night. Atisha was so stunned she barely noticed the necklace. Her face went bright red, and she covered her mouth in shame. The maids and Val de Prame were stunned too. They immediately imagined Duke Cayenne tearing Atisha's dress in a burst of passion. Atisha still couldn't believe the Duke had torn it, while he alone showed no reaction. Then she remembered the night before. She had been lying on his arm while his other hand touched her. A moment later, she had been in his arms. She had thought it was only a dream. Cayenne apologized again and said he had misjudged his strength. Atisha said it was fine and that anyone could make that mistake. He said he had already called in the designer and couldn't go back on his word. He wanted to make up for it with these gifts and asked her to accept them. Atisha told herself to stay calm. Too many people were watching. If she kept pulling away, they might get suspicious. Cayenne was clearly showing everyone that they were close, though she still didn't know if his story about the dress was true. Atisha picked the first jewelry box she liked and opened it. Inside was the heart of an angel, a stunning necklace. It looked like something straight out of the fairy tales she read as a child. In that story, a pink diamond had fallen from heaven, and the crown prince turned it into jewels for his bride, giving them to her over 7 days. She cried with happiness at gifts filled with his love, and then they married and lived happily ever after. Atisha couldn't believe such a precious jewel was now in her hands. The Duke saw that she recognized it and told her the necklace was made from an angel's heart, the first of the 7. Atisha said it was far too expensive for her. Cayenne brushed it off, saying it was just a rock, but Atisha knew it was incredibly valuable. He had chosen it because he thought it would look good on her. The Duke took out the necklace and asked Lady Atisha to hold up her hair. She moved her hair aside and he fastened the beautiful piece around her neck. Cayenne looked at her and said it suited her perfectly. Inside, Atisha was delighted. Now she had a new gift from the Duke on her neck and the Emperor's necklace hidden beneath her dress. Cayenne asked if she wanted to see the other gifts, but she said there was no need. He still had a lot of work, and she didn't want to keep him any longer. Touching the necklace, Atisha said she would treasure it. Cayenne nodded and said the rest would be sent to her dressing room. She thanked him, wished him a good day, and left the office. The maids could hardly believe he had given her the heart of an angel, and even smiled a little. And after tearing her dress last night, too, was this really the same Duke they knew? Baroness Atisha L. had suddenly become Duke Wintel's fiancée, and the hottest topic in high society. The maids whispered about the torn dress and how passionate the Duke must be. Rumors spread fast. About the heart of an angel, the dress, and Lady Cyril's tea invitation. Only 1 day remained before the tea party. Some people waited years for an invitation to Lady Cyril's tea party, so one maid asked why everyone was acting so shocked. She claimed she already knew Atisha was famous in the capital. Land, estates, even gifts from the Emperor. Didn't that prove Atisha L. was different from everyone else? And so, without her even knowing it, Atisha's importance kept growing by the day. That evening in the Star Tower, Judith heard all those rumors. Biting her nails, she wondered if Cayenne had really torn Atisha's dress. It felt impossible. No, that couldn't be true. Furious, Dith yanked out a chair and sat down. Then she started writing a letter to Marquis Hexion, who had promised to help her. A few days later, Hexion thanked them for accepting his invitation, saying he knew they were all busy. He told the women he hoped they were enjoying themselves. Mrs. Monmad quietly sipped her tea and looked at Judith. She couldn't understand why Marquis Hexion had invited a commoner here. If not for Lady Cyril's, she would have thrown Judith out already. The man watched. He watched how Judith acted in high society and decided that she was not like the others. A few days earlier, Marquis Hexion had told her she only had 1 month. Judith didn't get it and asked what he meant. He only smiled. Then he asked if he was right that the wedding would happen in a month. To the nobles, Dith was now a duchess's daughter and the lady of a duke's house. But what would happen when the real owner of the Wintel family returned? Everyone would forget her. And if those two married, she would be finished. Judith clenched her fist and asked what she had to do. Hexion said she had 1 month to make her place secure. She could not let the Wintels or the nobles treat her lightly. To do that, she needed allies. With that, he ended the meeting. His last advice was simple. Start with Countess Monmad. At the tea party, Judith decided to make her move. She rose and turned to Mrs. Cyriles, but then, accidentally, knocked over a cup of hot tea. Of course, it all spilled onto Countess Monmad, who instantly exploded. Tea soaked her expensive dress, while Judith kept apologizing and claiming it was a mistake. The Countess snapped that no one believed that. It was clearly on purpose. She stepped closer and said that even if it was an accident, Judith still had to be punished. Judith begged forgiveness again, insisting she hadn't meant it. She reached for a napkin to help, but Monmad slapped her hand away and told her not to touch her. Who was she to put her dirty hands on her? The other ladies stayed out of it. Then Mrs. Cyriles cut in and told the Countess she was being too harsh. Wiping her mouth, she said she had not brought some filthy child with her. Then the room went quiet, until Monmad shouted that Judith had spilled the tea on purpose. She said Judith was obviously still bitter after the banquet, and Cyriles started recalling it. She mentioned that at that banquet, one arrogant woman had slapped Dith across the face, her adopted daughter, during the very event where Judith was first introduced to society. Cyriles called that interesting and asked Madame Monmad if she knew who that reckless woman was. Monmad bit her lip and said she knew nothing about it, but the Duchess should let go of her anger and let the matter fade. Mrs. Cyriles said that was wonderful advice. She agreed. She stood and said that since noble Madame Monmad understood manners and law so well, she would surely forgive the mistakes of a child who still knew little. Monmad had no choice but to agree. Later, in the corridor, Monmad seethed, thinking that little Toad had won Madame Cyriles' support. Marquis Hexion walked up and told her the dress looked lovely on her. He offered an apology for what happened earlier. Noble law says not to ignore injustice, he said, but for certain reasons he couldn't confront the Countess directly and had no proper cause to approach her. She blushed and said he didn't need to apologize. Still, she hoped he would be more careful next time. She didn't want to see commoners here. Hexion said that was surprising. He thought she, of all people, would need that child. Monmad asked what he meant, and he explained that once Duke Cayenne married, a new duchess would rise. Madame Cyriles would soon leave the center of high society, and Baroness Atisha L., once called Atisha Hines, cut in. She had heard of Atisha and said the girl seemed shameless. Hexion asked if someone like that deserved to rule high society. Monmad asked if he meant she should take that place instead. He said she was far more worthy. If not her, then who could succeed Madame Cyriles? Then he told her to make use of Judith, the girl she looked down on as a commoner. Judith could become the tool that shakes mighty Duke Wintel. Hexion said she only had to seize the chance. That night in the castle, Atisha L. went for a walk in her nightclothes. As she wandered if Cayenne would sleep beside her again like he had yesterday. She also kept thinking about him tearing her dress. He could be rough at times. For a second, she wondered if he really liked that sort of thing, then quickly pushed the thought away. She silently asked the Duke's forgiveness for thinking something so improper. Then she noticed the wall and realized it held portraits of the Wintels, so she started looking through them. At the end, she finally found Duke Cayenne's portrait. She murmured that he looked cute, then noticed his birth date written there. 1 year of Barris, 5 of the gods, 7th star. She froze when she realized that was tomorrow. Just then, the Duke's voice sounded behind her, asking what she was doing there. Atisha panicked. She couldn't exactly admit she hadn't known his birthday, so she said she had just been walking, looking at the portraits, and got a little lost. Then she noticed something odd on the wall. One portrait was missing. She wondered why that space was empty, like someone had been removed. Standing there beside him, the whole thing made her uneasy. Cayenne asked where her maids were, and she hesitated. She said she had only stepped out for a minute, so she hadn't brought them. He said she looked pale and told her to return to her room and rest. He would call a doctor. Atisha quickly said she didn't need one, and Cayenne asked if something was bothering her. Blushing, she admitted she actually wanted to apologize. She hadn't known tomorrow was his birthday, and she assumed there would be a reception. The Duke told her they never held birthday celebrations for him. Atisha was shocked. He said he had never been used to celebrating it since childhood, and this year would be no different. She asked why, since birthdays were special. The Duke paused, then said he didn't want to waste time on something so troublesome. Atisha didn't really get that. Larry Ann Hines always went all out every year, so she asked if he would mind if it were kept simple instead. He didn't follow, and she explained that now that she knew tomorrow was his birthday, she didn't want it to pass like any other day. He had helped her so much and given her many things, so she wanted to return at least a little of that by helping. She added that she wasn't talking about a grand ball. She just wanted him to spend some time with her. He stepped closer and asked if his birthday mattered that much to her. Atisha said yes, because next year she wouldn't be with him. In her mind, if this really burdened him, she still didn't have much time left, so this was her only chance to celebrate it with him. At last, he agreed to spend the day with her, and Atisha happily thanked him from the heart. The next day, Atisha rode through the city in a carriage, looking out the window. She said the houses looked tidy and the roads were in great shape. Headmaid Corda explained that Duke Cayenne ordered regular inspections and repairs every year. He also gave aid to the elderly and victims of disasters, and during heavy snow, the roads were cleared before ice could form. Atisha thought the northern climate was harsher, yet the Duke still managed everything well. As expected, he was amazing. Corda asked why she had wanted to go out, and Atisha shyly said she needed to buy something. The maids asked what, and Atisha admitted she didn't know what gift the Duke would like. She felt lost because he seemed to already have everything. Suddenly, the carriage jerked to a stop and she asked what was happening. Corda said she would step out and check. Outside, the guards yelled at a stranger for daring to block a Wintel carriage. Hexion thought people might take him for some kind of killer, then said he had only wanted to say hello. Atisha started to recognize him. She told the guards to stop and stepped out of the carriage. Atisha asked Corda if she was right, and the maid confirmed it at once. It was Marquis Hexion. Atisha couldn't understand why a marquis was standing in the street without an escort. She walked up and bowed, saying she was glad to meet him. She introduced herself, and he said he already knew exactly who she was. Only 3 people, he said, were allowed to ride in a carriage bearing the Wintel crest. Duke Cayenne, Madame Cyrillez, and Baroness Atisha El Hexion even held up 3 fingers. So if the odds were 1 in 3, he figured it was worth throwing himself in front of it. Atisha asked what that meant, and he said he had simply been bored. He moved closer, leaned in, and asked if she really didn't remember him. Atisha had no idea what was wrong with this man. He hadn't even known for sure she was the one inside, yet he still blocked the road. If things had gone badly, the horses could have trampled him. She still didn't understand what he meant. Was he talking about the tea gathering? So Atisha asked if he meant the last tea party. She apologized for not accepting his invitation that day, since she still wasn't used to the north. Hexion went quiet and gloomy, and Atisha felt the mood turn strange. Had she said something wrong? He struggled to answer, then finally said it was sad that she didn't remember him. Atisha looked confused and asked if he might be mistaking her for someone else. He pulled his hood back up and said he must have been mistaken. Atisha noticed his voice had turned much colder. He was probably upset. Hines apologized for suddenly jumping out in front of her carriage. He said someone was waiting for him, asked for forgiveness again, and left. Corda asked Lady Atisha if she knew Marquis Hexion, but Atisha said this was their first meeting. The headmaid said that was strange, and Atisha started to wonder if she really had met Marquis Hexion before. Still, if she had met someone that memorable, she felt sure she would remember. At the same time, someone sent Judith a box with a beautiful dress. She tried it on, and it looked amazing. Judith could hardly believe it was hers. Then she noticed a note in the box and hoped the gift hadn't been sent by mistake. She read it and found out the gift was from Mrs. Monmad. Even after reading it again, she still couldn't believe it. At the last tea party, Madame Monmad had said she wanted to be friends with her. Dith had never gotten a gift like this before. Did this mean Madame Monmad saw her as the Duke's lady? Holding the dress tight, she felt truly happy. Usually the lady gave her loose, simple clothes. But in this one, she looked like the star of a fancy party. She started wondering what Cayenne would say when he saw her wearing it. Would he see her differently now that she looked so beautiful? She wanted to go see Duke Cayenne right away. The table was already set for the Duke's birthday. Atisha was already seated waiting for him. She wondered if he would like her gift. If he did, she'd be very happy. Cayenne of Wintel entered the hall. Atisha started to stand, but he told her not to. She greeted him and he said he'd heard someone came to see her. He asked if there had been any trouble. Atisha said it was nothing serious, just a small incident. Then she brought out her gift and asked him to accept it. Cayenne couldn't tell what it was at first. She explained that it was her birthday present for him. Since it was a plant, he could keep growing it. She picked it because the Duke could enjoy it for a long time. Kyan didn't know how to react. He touched the blue center of the flower, and a tiny copy of Atisha appeared, wishing him a happy birthday. The little image said she hoped this year would be happy too, and thanked him for everything. Kyan was stunned by the gift. He realized Atisha still wanted to celebrate his birthday. Even though she would die in a year, she was still thinking of him. A year from now, she would be gone, sick and dead. Kyan didn't understand why that thought made his heart drop. Atisha asked if he liked the gift, but suddenly Atisha L felt a sharp pain and dropped to her knees in front of him. For a moment, Kyan couldn't understand what was happening. Then he rushed forward and caught her, but she collapsed right into his lap. He shouted for her to stay awake. The gift she had spent so much time picking was broken. Kian of Wintel kept asking if she was okay, but all she could do was groan. Fearing the worst, he decided to call a doctor at once. Atisha touched his arm and told him there was no need. She was fine. She explained that this was only the second symptom and that she would recover soon. She showed she was telling the truth and had already improved, leaving Kyan confused. He asked again if she was really all right, and she said yes, thanking him. Atisha apologized because his gift had been broken because of her. He told her it was fine. The stone with the image and the water lily were still safe. They only needed a new container. Then Atisha noticed he was soaked and worried he might get sick. She took a napkin from the table and asked him to wait, then started drying him off. Atisha said they should wipe away the moisture first with a cloth. She added that she was glad he was all right, while the Duke grew embarrassed by how close they were. Just then, Judith walked in and saw the whole intimate scene. She noticed the ring on Atisha's finger again and froze. Pyrrha saw her too, but everyone just stood there in silence, unsure what to say. Atisha worried about what to do now. What if Dith had seen her mana illness symptoms? The man wrapped an arm around Atisha's waist and asked Dith what was going on. Judith couldn't answer. She just stood there, frozen. Then she forced a smile and said she came to show him her outfit, because it was the first really stylish dress she'd worn in a long time. Dith said Madame Monmad gave it to her, and she wanted to show it to Kyan too. But as she walked, she stepped on the same stone. A tiny copy of Atisha appeared from it again and started wishing the Duke a happy birthday. It repeated that she hoped next year would be just as happy, and thanked him. Atisha looked at Judith with worry, and the Duke asked if everything was all right. Dith was furious. A birthday? Was Atisha really celebrating Kyan's birthday? That felt impossible. Kyan always forgot his own birthday. He never had celebrations or gifts. Judith told herself not to get upset, that no one could have Kyan. She clenched her teeth, hating all of this. She could barely stop herself from crying, so she chose not to run from the room. Atisha L called for her to wait, but when she tried to follow, the Duke caught her hand. Atisha didn't understand why and could only watch Judith leave in alarm. That night, Judith ran through the castle, thinking Kyan belonged with her more than with Atisha. She cared about Kyan far more than Atisha ever could. Lady Kyan's should be her. She should be the one cared for by Mrs. Cyrillez, the one getting gifts from Kyan, the one loved by the servants and maids. Atisha wasn't the right woman. Judith believed it should all be hers. Later, she cried into her pillow, thinking about becoming Kyan's woman. When a tear landed on her palm, she realized she had to take Atisha's place. Marquis Hexion entered the room and, calling her a canary, let out a sigh. He leaned over, stroked her gently, and softly asked why she was crying. Judith didn't understand why he was there, but she asked what she should do. Taking his hand, she said she'd do anything to take Atisha's place. Hexion smiled, held her face, and told her congratulations. The canary had left the cage. Before bed, Kyan asked Atisha if she was having trouble breathing. She said she felt much better now and thanked him for worrying. He asked if she'd overworked herself by going out earlier. Atisha said no. Corda and the night helped her a lot, so she got back quickly. Then Atisha said that earlier she had run into Marquis Hexion. He suddenly jumped in front of the carriage and there was nearly an accident. He acted like he knew her, but it was their first meeting. Atisha said she thought he must have mistaken her for someone else. The Duke paused, then said he should have warned her about something sooner but missed the chance. Among the great nobles of the world, there were two people Lady Atisha needed to be careful around. The first was Madame Monmad. He said it wouldn't be wrong to say most gossip and scandals in the north started with her. He warned Atisha not to get too involved with her and to watch her words. The second was Marquis Hexion. Kyan told her not to pay attention to the Marquis's interest in her, and Atisha thought over his warning. The Duke said Hexion was dangerous and liked playing with women. Any woman tied to him would have her life ruined. Atisha answered that would never happen. She said she understood and would remember that. The Duke said good. Then he told her to go to sleep since she needed rest. Atisha asked when he would sleep. Kyan replied that she shouldn't worry about him or what time he went to bed. Atisha closed her eyes, thinking she still wanted to ask if Dith was okay. Seeing her grow sleepy, the Duke lifted his hand as if to stroke her hair, but he suddenly caught himself and pulled it back. A few days later, Atisha sat drinking tea and thinking about everything that had happened. She was worried that Dith had seen her mana illness that day, but nothing had happened over those past few days. Atisha was relieved she hadn't run into Judith. Things had become far too complicated. Then Mrs. Cyrillès called out to her daughter-in-law and asked if she was there. Atisha answered that she was. Cyrillès handed her a paper and said it was the guest list for the wedding invitations. Atisha looked it over and thought everyone on it was important. The imperial family, royals, nobles, archmages, and high priests. Cyrillès told her that if she wanted to add or remove anyone, she should say so now. Atisha said the list was fine. Her wedding was also the Wintel family's wedding, so the guests Mother invited were her guests too. Mrs. Cyrillès was touched and said her daughter-in-law spoke beautifully and was very thoughtful. Atisha answered that Cyrillès was too kind and praised her too much. Embarrassed, the lady said she'd keep the final guest list as it was. Atisha thought Cyrillès really was the kindest person in the empire. Then Cyrillès took out one more invitation and said she had prepared it just in case. Atisha opened it and was shocked. Cyrillès said she wasn't sure if it would be needed, but her daughter-in-law's opinion mattered most. Atisha couldn't believe it was an invitation for the Hines family. It was addressed to Sister Larianne, Viscount Hines, and Lady Dorothea. Would they really all come north? Atisha set the envelope back on the table. Cyrillès said it seemed an invitation might not be necessary. She apologized, saying she should have asked first. Atisha said she understood and was thankful she did. Cyrillès called a maid over and told her to throw the letter away. Then she changed her mind and ordered her to tear it up and burn it. Then she added, "Melt the ashes in water, freeze it, and chop the ice with an axe." The maid said she'd do it at once. She then asked Atisha if they should pour oil on the broken ice and burn it one more time. Atisha instead asked if she could have that invitation, if no one minded. Cyrillès realized she had overdone it, but Atisha said she wanted to destroy it herself. At the Marquis Hexian's residence, he asked if the canary was ready. At the Marquis Hexian's residence, a man asked if the canary was ready. The girl stepped out in a red dress, wearing a mask. She asked if she really had to wear it, since she wanted to pick something else. The Marquis reminded her that last time she liked it because it was so lovely. Judith shot back that she hated him now, but he told her that didn't matter anymore. He said this was her big chance to appear in a gift from Madame Momad. Girls without power have to use whatever they can, so she needed to stay patient. If things worked out, she could buy dresses like this herself. Dith said she understood. She admitted to herself he was right. This time, she'd climb up on her own. When she entered the main hall, everyone noticed her at once. Judith told herself that from today on, she was Mrs. Cayens. She had come to this party as his courtesan. At the ball, guests danced and enjoyed themselves. Others stood around gossiping. But the mood shifted when a girl entered the hall. She wore a mask and an elegant dress, and every eye turned to her. Judith thought everything was going smoothly. She just had to act confident. Now all she had to do was wait for her mother to show her the way. Then suddenly, a waiter carrying glasses bumped into Judith. Fresh champagne spilled as the glasses crashed to the floor. The waiter apologized and asked if she was hurt. Judith removed her mask, smiled, and said she was fine. The guests were shocked to see Judith underneath. How did a commoner get into this party? Did Marquis Hexian really let someone in without checking who she was? People quickly assumed someone important had brought her. Maybe Duke Cayenne brought her as his mistress. If that was true, then she had to be Duke Cayenne's lover. Val de Prame told the Duke they had found him, so he was still alive. Cayenne answered that of course he was. He wasn't easy to kill. Val said it felt like someone kept helping the man whenever they almost caught him. He suspected there was an insider, and Cayenne of Wintel said he already knew. When Val asked again, the Duke confirmed it, but said there was no need to worry. Val just had to keep watching him. This time, he had to be even more careful and not get caught again. Val de Prame said he understood and left the Duke's office. In the hallway, he stopped and wondered what the Duke was really planning. He couldn't understand him at all. Lately, the Duke only seemed to care about the vase Lady Atisha gave him. His whole mood felt different now. Then Val realized something. The Duke had pressed the blue ball again, and Atisha's birthday message played, wishing him a happy birthday and a good year. Val de Prame was stunned. If the Duke had really changed that much, then maybe he'd even treat his dog differently. The next day, Judith hummed happily as she stared at a huge pile of gifts. She thought Marquis Hexian had been right. Everyone at the party believed she was Cayenne's lover, so they sent her presents. If she wore them in public, wouldn't that only make people believe it more? Then someone knocked and asked if she was inside. It was Mrs. Cyrillès. Judith froze. She hadn't expected her, and had no idea what to do with the gifts on the table. Cyrillès said she only had something brief to say. Judith hurried to hide the gifts and asked for a moment, but then the door opened. Judith thought that if Madame Cyrillès saw them, she was done. She sat down, forced herself to stay calm, and looked at her mother, who seemed furious. Cyrillès said she'd heard Judith and Marquis Hexian were getting quite close. She asked if it was true Judith had called him to her tower and gone out with him. Judith stayed silent. The Marquis had said he slipped past all the guards, so how had she learned about it? Then Mrs. Cyrillès took her daughter's hands and said she understood. Judith was old enough to marry, so of course she'd be looking for a man. With Cayenne's wedding coming, Cyrillès hadn't been able to pay much attention to her. She said Judith's trouble came from inexperience, but she still hoped her daughter would marry a rich, good man, not become some noble's concubine. She promised to support her and accept any man Judith truly wanted. Judith was shocked. She had expected a scolding. Instead, her mother was showing real care. She truly wanted Judith to be happy. Maybe she would even let her be with Cayenne. So Judith said there was something she wanted to confess. Madame told her to speak. Judith admitted that she loved Cayenne. She said she wanted to become his concubine. That way she could stay by her mistress and live happily in the castle for a long time. Cyrillès suddenly stood and slapped her. Judith cried out. Cyrillès looked horrified by what she'd done and said it was impossible. They could never be like that. Then she flipped the table, grabbed Judith, and started shaking her. Judith begged her to stop, but Cyrillès screamed for her to swear she'd never look at Cayenne as a man again. Judith only sobbed, unable to answer, and her mother shouted for her to speak. Then Mrs. Cyrillès suddenly came to her senses and let go. Judith fell hard to the floor, and Cyrillès's face filled with regret. She bent down, apologized, and reached for Judith, but the girl pulled away. Turning from her, Judith said she wanted to be alone. Cyrillès realized she should leave. Before going, she said she'd send a doctor and told Judith to report any injuries. On a bright spring day, the Ignaben's Empire began celebrating the spring festival. Atisha asked again, and the Duke explained that Madame Monmad had invited her to the spring festival. She was surprised they still held a spring festival in the north, even without spring. She asked if they might catch cold since the event was outside. Cayenne said that despite the name, it was actually an indoor party. Madame Monmad just liked creating a spring mood. He asked whether Atisha wanted to go. Atisha thought she had been in the north for a while now, so maybe it was time to attend events like this. She said she'd be happy to go if he came too. He told her to assume she was going. Atisha asked if that was really okay. Maybe he was busy and she was taking his time. The Duke answered that before the wedding, he would accompany Lady Atisha to a few places. Privately, he knew he had no time for parties like this, but he could spare a little while. Atisha thanked him and said she could finally try wearing some of the things he had given her. Cayenne admitted to himself that he was busy, but he could rearrange his schedule. After all, once Atisha died, he would never attend private parties again. Atisha wondered what dress to wear since every dress he gave her was beautiful. He asked what she meant. For a spring festival, she needed a brand new matching dress. Atisha pointed out she still had many dresses in her closet she hadn't worn yet. Cayenne said then he'd hold a party where she could wear them. That was only normal for Lady Atisha. He added that it might be nice to hold a festival in Wintel territory too. She could wear matching dresses on different days, or even set a theme for the whole week. Atisha laughed. She had tried to refuse one dress and somehow ended up getting a whole party instead. At the spring festival, guests were already starting to arrive. Madame Monmad asked Judith if she remembered the lines, and Judith said she knew them perfectly. Madame explained again that the spring festival opens with the Song of Spring, and the singer becomes the star of the event. Judith told her not to worry. She had practiced for several nights and memorized it all. Monmad thought Baroness Atisha would be there today. Duke Cayenne had said he'd escort her, but that was likely just for show. He was known for never attending events like this. Today, she would show them all. The title of main wife being worse than a concubine would follow Atisha forever. Judith needed to become a useful tool. Monmad pulled up the girl's scarf to cover her shoulders. She said Judith's shoulders were too exposed and that clothes like this hurt a woman's dignity, so she should be more careful. Hadn't Madame Cyrillès taught her that? Judith lowered her head and apologized. Monmad noticed Judith's face change at the mention of Madame Cyrillès and wondered if she should push further. Then she said everything was fine. Madame Cyrillès was known for cruelty, and anyone close to her got hurt. Judith had done nothing wrong. If Mrs. Cyrillès troubled her again, she could come to Monmad. Judith wiped away a tear. She said she thought her mistress cared for her, but now it seemed that wasn't true. She asked Monmad what she should do, saying her throat went dry whenever she cried. Monmad told her to act like she knew nothing and just get through today. If Cyrillès asks, Judith should just say she found the scarf and that it was a gift. She told her to enjoy the song tonight and said she'd be waiting. In her heart, Judith thought Monmad was truly kind. As Madame Monmad walked down the stairs, she wondered who had arrived. Then her face tightened when she saw Miss Atisha with Duke Cayenne. The man who almost never shows up at parties had come as her escort. And that necklace? Was it the heart of an angel? Monmad decided this might work out well. Today, that girl would be humiliated right in front of Duke Cayenne. Madame Monmad thanked everyone for attending her party. She said a spring festival should begin, of course, with a song to welcome the season. With a wave of her fan, she asked Judith to step forward. Then she introduced Judith as the one who would sing spring's opening song. Atisha was stunned to see Dith there, and the guests immediately started whispering. Seeing how close Monmad seemed to her, they became even more sure Judith really was Duke Cayenne's favorite. Monmad went on, saying that before the song starts, the spring festival is still unfamiliar to Northerners. She added that Miss Dith, who would perform it, was also from the North. This song about welcoming spring might be too much for her alone, if only someone could help Miss Judith. Then she turned to Baroness Atisha and asked if she would sing with Dith. The guests quickly joined in, asking Atisha to sing too. They wanted to hear the spring opening song from someone from the capital. Monmad smiled to herself. The wife and the mistress would stand side by side and sing, and everyone would compare them. And from what she'd heard, Baroness Atisha was supposedly tone-deaf. This should be humiliating. Then the Duke asked Madame Monmad what exactly she was doing. He couldn't believe she'd make such a rude request of an invited guest. The Countess answered that it would be lovely and that he was overreacting. She claimed she only wanted to give the Baroness the honor of singing spring's opening song. Cayenne asked if she was really calling this an honor. Then what was her real goal? She had put Dith, a commoner, in such a spotlight. Monmad replied that she'd received an anonymous recommendation. She was told Judith sang as sweetly as a canary. Cayenne said she was using Dith's innocence to insult Miss Atisha, and the same went for everyone backing the Countess. From start to finish, he didn't trust their intentions. Atisha L. took his hand and said it would be fine if she sang. He warned her the whole thing felt strange, but the Baroness said she didn't want the celebration ruined because of her. Touching the pendant, she added that she wanted to sing too. Cayenne of Wintel answered that if she was truly all right with it, then she could go. Atisha walked up to the Countess and asked if she could sing now. The woman was caught off guard. Atisha said she meant the song that opens spring. Chances like this were rare, and she wanted to take it. She asked Dith if they would sing together, and whether Judith wanted the first verse. If Atisha caught the rhythm, she could join in after. Judith agreed to take the first verse. The two girls stood side by side to begin. Dith thought this was her chance to prove she, not Atisha, belonged with Cayenne. Judith began the first verse, and her lovely voice drew the guests in. Monmad thought the plan had changed a little, but it was still working. Soon, Atisha would embarrass herself in front of everyone. Then the girl began to sing, and to Monmad's shock, the Baroness had a beautiful voice the guests immediately admired. She thought it was impossible. She had clearly heard the Baroness was tone-deaf. Judith also couldn't understand how Atisha had such a voice. The girl remembered how much she used to love singing, but she never showed it because her sister Larianne was deaf. That dream had stayed buried until now. When she finished, applause burst out. People shouted in praise, amazed she had hidden a talent like this for so long. That evening, she and the Duke headed home by carriage. Atisha thanked him for agreeing to leave. He said he needed to return to the castle anyway and asked if she was tired. The girl said she wasn't, and then admitted she wanted to sing more. Atisha wanted to sing freely, somewhere open and quiet, with no one to stop her. The Duke tapped the window to set the carriage moving and told her he knew a place where she could sing as much as she wanted. After a while, they were still traveling through the snowy forest. At last, they arrived. The Duke stepped out first and offered Atisha his hand, asking her to come with him. She stopped in place, struck by the beauty waiting beyond the road. Atisha asked Cayenne what this place was, and he told her he had lived here as a child. He reminded her that she had wanted somewhere she could sing without being disturbed. No one comes here. Atisha smiled at him and realized this was his secret place. He said he would always help her and invited her inside. Once they entered, she was amazed by how the place felt both simple and rich. She kept saying how beautiful it was, while the Duke said he knew it was rather small. He added that if she felt uncomfortable, they could go back to Wintel Castle. Atisha L. quickly said no. She truly liked it here. She had only been surprised and didn't know what to say at first. She told him it might sound strange, but for some reason, this place made her feel safe and cozy. Then she began to open the window. Looking out, she said again that she really loved it here. The Duke said that when he was young, he often came to the forest alone to practice swordsmanship. So when she mentioned a place without interruptions, this house was the first place he thought of. It was somewhere he had nearly forgotten. Until now. The girl grew shy when he said he remembered it because he had listened to her sing. He went on, saying that since she liked it, she could come use the house anytime. To Atisha, it felt like an abandoned house made for singing, and she wanted to try it once. So she started to sing, and her voice filled the house. Atisha felt a little shy, but even happier that she could sing again, while Cayenne of Wintel listened closely. At the same time, back at the Hines estate, Larianne lost control. She shattered a cup and screamed. She shouted that she knew how to handle things herself, so why still couldn't she see Atisha? Madame Dorothea was stunned by her daughter's sudden mood swing and question. Larianne dropped to the floor, clutching her head and screaming Atisha's name. Her sweet, beloved doll, the one who existed just for her, the one she would never get tired of. Atisha had already been in the north for 2 weeks, and she still had no way to reach her. Her mother asked Larianne to calm down first and speak clearly. When Dorothea tried to touch her, Larianne slapped her hand away and yelled that Tisha belonged only to her and should stay by her side. Dorothea thought she might settle down if she comforted her for a while, but this had become a serious problem. The situation was getting harder to control. Larianne said all of high society was excited today because they had received an invitation from the Duke of Wintel. She added that she had to go too. Go to Tisha's wedding. Dorothea tried to stop her, but Larianne snapped that it was all useless. If they locked her up again, she would bite her tongue and kill herself. Madame cried out, asking how she could say such a thing. Did she really want to break her mother's heart? Larianne opened the door and stormed out, leaving her mother shouting behind her. Back in her room, she thought about how to get north and see Tisha. Then she would bring her back to the Hines estate. But if that failed, she would leave her family too and stay in the north with Tisha. The next day, as a maid brushed Atisha's hair, she mentioned that the Duke had left early again. Since the wedding was close, it would be nice if he spent more time with her. Atisha told her not to say that. The Duke had gone to the party with her yesterday and even took her to his house. Marin said she still wished the Duke cared for her more than that. This was the north. Atisha had left the capital to come here, and the Duke was the one person she could depend on. Marin was about to say more, but Atisha suddenly took the comb from her hands. She stood, sat the maid down in the chair, and left Marin confused. The Baroness thanked her, then gently said she was wrong. The Duke was not the only person she could rely on. She also had Marin. The maid could hardly believe it, and Atisha told her she meant a lot to her. She also had Marin's mother, who took good care of her too, and she had herself. She had learned that she could be a strong support for herself as well. Until now, Atisha had only tried to understand the Duke and learn more about him, but she realized she first needed to understand herself. Someone knocked on the door, and Corda spoke from outside. She said it was her, the head maid. Atisha asked what was going on, and Corda entered. The woman said they needed to go to Snow Castle because the great lady was waiting for her. When they reached Snow Castle, Atisha was shocked by how huge it was. She was excited knowing the former Duke and Duchess of Wintel had once lived there. Inside, she thought it was just as lovely. The place had an old charm. Corda told her to come this way and open the doors. Mrs. Cyrilese was waiting in the hall, greeting her daughter-in-law and asking her to come closer. Atisha L. stepped closer and followed her mother-in-law's gaze. Behind the glass were two mannequins wearing the Duke and Duchess's wedding outfits. Cyrilese said the wedding was only 2 weeks away, and since everything was ready, Atisha should try the dress on. The maids gently led her to another room to change. When Atisha came out, everyone was stunned. She looked beautiful. The lady asked Corda if rushing the work had been worth it, and Corda said yes. The dress fit Atisha perfectly. Cyrilese walked up and said she was happy to see the Wintel heirloom shining so brightly after being passed down for generations. Atisha wondered if she was really allowed to wear something so precious. She told the lady that if it was a family treasure, then every Duchess of Wintel must have worn it at her wedding. Miss Cyrilese said there was one exception, herself. She hadn't worn this dress at her wedding, and her husband hadn't worn the matching outfit either. She said things happen that way sometimes. No one knows what comes next. Then she told Atisha not to worry about such a small matter. Atisha turned to the mirror, thinking about those words. Was she making this harder on herself? Maybe she didn't need to take it so seriously. She decided that made sense. For now, she should think quietly on her own. Looking at the outfit again, she wondered when she would finally meet the Duke's father. Meanwhile, Larianne Hines ran through the empty city streets. She had only one thought. She had to see Atisha. Suddenly, she slammed into a man hard. She snapped at him, calling him crazy and asking how he could bump into a noblewoman like that. Telling him to watch where he was going, she ran off again. The man said nothing and only stared after her coldly. When Larianne reached the portal to the north, she handed a servant a bag of coins for helping her. Then she overheard something important. Someone told Carls it was time to leave. He asked if it was already time, then agreed they should return to Wintel. Larianne knew that name. Carls Wintel, Duke Cayen's father. At first, she acted like she didn't recognize him and just watched. She wondered if following him would make it easier to reach the Wintel family. But that felt ridiculous. Why should she sneak after him? She pulled off her cloak and reminded herself that she was Larianne Hines. She didn't need to act so pathetic. Larianne walked up to him and called his behavior rude. He turned around. She introduced herself as Larianne Hines of the Hines Viscounty and the older sister of Atisha, who would soon become Duchess of Wintel. The man turned away without a word and started walking off. Larianne was stunned. Why was he looking down on her? He was dark and tall like a pillar, and that made her think. She remembered crashing into someone earlier while rushing to the teleporter. That man in the alley had also looked like a pillar. Was that the former Duke Carls too? Had he ignored her on purpose? She hurried after him again and apologized for what happened in the alley. She explained she had been in a rush, that's all. Carls Wintel replied that he had never been in such a place. Larianne was shocked and said it was only now that she understood. The man said the two simply had identical faces. That was the whole reason. Larianne said that if they'd met like this, it must be fate, and asked if she could travel north with him since she had nowhere to stay in Wintel before the wedding. Carl's Wintel said she could stay at Wintel Castle until the wedding. He welcomed her as his guest. Larianne couldn't believe it was that easy. A moment ago, he had ignored her. Then she looked into his eyes and saw they were sky blue, while the man from the alley had black eyes. So it really was someone else. She stood there thinking, why had that man been pretending to be someone else? The next day, Atisha went out to the courtyard to meet Duke Cayenne. His carriage arrived, and as soon as he stepped out, Atisha was drawn in by him again. She greeted him warmly and said he had come back earlier than usual today. Cayenne looked surprised and asked if she had been waiting for him. Blushing, she denied it and said she was going to have tea with her mother today. He said he was heading to the snow castle. Atisha said she had gone there yesterday too, and it was amazing. She had even tried on a wedding dress. She couldn't understand why he looked more tired today, almost shadowed. Then she asked if she could come greet him whenever he returned. The Duke seemed confused and asked if she really wanted to come out and meet him every time. Atisha blushed even harder, wondering why she had said that. She quickly took it back, saying it was nothing and asking him to forget it. Still, she asked him to think about it. Maybe waiting outside would make him uncomfortable. After all, the castle maids also came out to greet him, and there were so many of them. She apologized, saying this wasn't what they had agreed on. He leaned closer and told her not to say things like that. He really didn't like hearing it. Tea parties, festivals, anything she wanted. It was all fine with him. He told her to spend the rest of this time however she liked. Atisha thought Cayenne had always been like this, but something still felt different. So she asked if that meant she could live however she wanted in Wintel Castle. He said yes. She asked if that included having tea with her mother instead of waiting for him. Again, he said yes. And if she wanted anything else, she only had to tell him. Atisha thought about what she wanted right now and realized she knew. She called to the Duke, held out her hand, and asked him to come with her to the snow castle for tea with her mother. Meanwhile, at the castle, Mrs. Cyrillus was having tea with Judith. She apologized for calling her over so suddenly and said she wanted to say sorry in person for what happened last time. Judith lowered her head and said she should be the one apologizing. Because she wanted to become Cayenne's concubine, she had become unstable. She started crying, and the mistress quickly sat beside her on the sofa. She comforted her, saying it was all right and that she could grant her other wishes, whatever or whoever she wanted. Judith said Madame Momard had told her that even a commoner could still find a way out. If His Majesty approved and a noble family accepted her, she could gain noble status. Crying, she begged that if the lady truly loved her like a daughter, then please accept her into the official Wintel family. If that happened, could she really become the Grand Duchess's daughter? Judith swore that if she got that, she would never think about Cayenne again. There was a long silence. Then Judith repeated that the mistress had always cared for her. Cyril said that if she could, she would gladly give Judith noble status, but it was beyond her power. She couldn't explain why. Judith first thought she was lying, but the lady's words made it clear she truly cared. Judith remembered all the times she had been told she was precious, yet part of her still thought it was a lie. The voices in her head warned her not to be fooled again. A noble Duchess of Wintel would never see someone like her as a real daughter. She was only an imperial canary, a favored pet bird. Suddenly, Judith calmed down and said it was fine. She had only said it in the moment. She apologized for bringing it up so suddenly. She thanked the lady for the gift, asked forgiveness, and moved to leave the hall. But when she opened the door, Cayenne was standing there with Atisha. Mrs. Cyrils apologized and said they should head back today. They could meet again tomorrow. Atisha smiled and agreed, but then Dith grabbed the Duke's hand and begged them not to go. With pleading eyes, she asked them to stay with her, especially Cayenne. Atisha stared at Judith in shock, unable to understand what had just happened. The Duke pulled his hand back and suggested they all have tea together. The four of them. Judith brightened at once, as if she hadn't just been crying. As the four sat drinking tea, Atisha couldn't stop wondering what had happened here. She didn't like the look on the Duchess's face. It was dark and troubled. And she couldn't guess what the Duke was thinking when he invited everyone to sit together. Judith reached toward Cayenne and said it reminded her of the old days. They had been the only two children in the castle, so they always played together. She looked up and asked if he remembered the little hut built in the tree. She said Cayenne used to go there alone when he was young, and that she had wanted to go with him too. He asked if she meant the house he had recently visited with Miss Atisha. He added that Miss Atisha would be using it often now, so she could sing there in peace. Cyrillus told her daughter-in-law she had heard Atisha sang a song for the opening of spring. Atisha smiled and said she had received many compliments, and she hoped the mistress would sing for her someday too. Cyrillus replied that she was already looking forward to hearing her daughter-in-law sing again. The Duke lifted his teacup and asked his mother if she knew Dith had also been invited to that party. The Duchess said she already knew. Cayenne answered that he'd explain it briefly. He said he had ended several deals with Count Monmad's family, and Cyrillius called that a fair decision. Judith snapped and shouted, asking if he had really cut ties with Count Monmad. She insisted Countess Monmad had done nothing wrong and only sang because she wanted to. Cayenne told her that if she stayed close to Countess Monmad, the Wintels wouldn't be able to protect her anymore. He told her to come to her senses now. There was still time to talk it through. Judith slammed the table and yelled that Madame Monmad was a good person. She knocked tea onto the floor and declared that she was leaving. Cyrillius shouted for her not to go, and Atisha quickly said she would follow her. Atisha ran outside, calling for Dith, and spotted her a short distance from the castle. Judith was sitting there with her knees pulled in, looking miserable, so Atisha walked up to her. She gently asked if Judith could stand, warning that running off like that could make her fall. Atisha reached out her hand, but Judith slapped it away and screamed. Without even looking up, Judith asked who Atisha was to call Cyrillius Mom. She said a mistress is just a mistress. So why was Atisha calling her that? Judith suddenly grabbed her. Atisha cried out for her to calm down. Seeing that she was far too worked up, Judith kept yelling that Atisha was out of line, then suddenly pulled the ring off her finger. She picked up a big stone from the ground and smiled. Atisha begged her not to, but Judith only stared at the ring with wild eyes and laughed. She paused like she was deciding what to do, while Atisha pleaded for the ring back. Judith looked her in the eyes, gave a wide smile, and raised the stone over the ring. Atisha, completely stunned, cried out and asked what she was doing. Judith said that if she couldn't have the ring, she would destroy it. Atisha grabbed her wrist and told her to stop right now. Judith screamed at her to stay away, then ran off. Atisha realized Judith still wasn't calming down and wondered why she was so frantic. Then someone behind her called the whole thing insane, and Atisha recognized the voice. She turned and saw her sister, Larry-Ann, walking toward her. Atisha asked why she was here, but Larry-Ann was staring only at Judith. Judith asked who she was, and Larry-Ann grabbed her dress and started shaking her. She demanded to know how Judith dared touch her sister, which clearly scared Dith. Atisha watched in shock, wondering why Larry-Ann had shown up here. Larry-Ann then grabbed Judith by the hair and shouted that Atisha had already endured enough. Atisha rushed over, begging her sister to stop. Larry-Ann asked Judith if she really thought she was the only crazy person in the world. She yanked harder on Judith's hair, making her cry out in pain. Larry-Ann asked what Judith would do if she turned out to be even crazier. In the struggle, Larry-Ann's elbow hit Atisha in the chest by accident, and Atisha cried out. Then someone grabbed Atisha by the shoulder and pulled her back. It was the Duke who had come after hearing the screams. Atisha felt relieved to see him, and he immediately asked if she was all right. She smiled in relief. Cayenne said he had been worried, so he came at once. He then looked over at Larry-Ann and Judith and asked what was happening here. Cayenne stepped forward and ordered Lady Hines to stop at once. Larry-Ann froze, then let Judith go, and Atisha quickly stepped in. She asked everyone to wait because she wanted to speak with her sister alone. Valdeprame explained to the Duke that Lady Hines had met the former Duke while traveling north and ended up accompanying him. Cayenne replied that his father rarely supports anyone so easily, so why had he brought Hines along? Larry-Ann Hines. He thought about how bold she was to come here. If she hurt Atisha again, he wouldn't stop at simply throwing her out. Atisha stayed quiet while Larry-Ann looked at her with a smug smile. Atisha asked how she got here, and Larry-Ann said she had met Sir Carl's on the way. Atisha could hardly believe it, but her sister said it was true. She would stay at Wintel Castle until the wedding. She had been officially invited as a guest of the former Duke. Atisha then remembered that Judith had also gotten an invitation from Sir Carl's. She told Larry-Ann their parents would worry, so she should return home, but Larry-Ann flatly refused. Atisha realized, as expected, that her sister had no plan to leave. Larry-Ann smiled and said she had really missed Atisha, especially talks like this. Atisha answered that she hadn't missed her at all. Larry-Ann snapped that Tisha should speak politely. Atisha told her sister to stop this and go back to the capital. Larry-Ann shouted, asking who had filled her head with that idea, then decided it had to be Cayenne. He had trapped and brainwashed her. She yelled that he was turning Atisha against her own sister and told Atisha to wake up. A great man like the Duke would never truly marry her. She was dreaming. Atisha asked her not to shout, but Larry-Ann demanded to know if the Duke had really stolen Tisha away from her. Atisha told her sister that she didn't belong to her. Soon she would be the Duchess of Wintel and live a life separate from the Hines family. Larry-Ann asked if she really meant to marry Duke Cayenne. Did she care more about him than her own sister? Atisha said yes. Of course she liked Duke Cayenne more. She truly liked him. Larry-Ann exploded, saying no. She absolutely didn't. She insisted he would hurt Atisha and abandon her someday. But Atisha said the Duke wasn't like that. Angry now, Larry-Ann said that if Atisha was going this far, then she had no choice. She threatened to tell everyone about Atisha's illness, her excess magical power. That evening, Atisha stood by her window, staring up at the night sky. She kept thinking about Larry-Ann's threat to expose her excess magic. Someone called to her from behind. It was the Duke. Atisha was glad to see him. Cayenne held out his hand, and when she took it, he gently pulled her closer. She blushed. He shut the window and said the northern wind had gotten strong, so she needed to be careful. Noticing her troubled face, Cayenne asked if she was still upset over what happened today. Atisha swallowed and told him there was something she needed to say. She explained that her sister had beaten Dith because Dith tried to break her wedding ring. Atisha tried to hide the bruise on her arm left by Dith, but the Duke noticed. He apologized for being careless. Atisha didn't understand, so he pointed out how bad her hand looked. He said it was already turning red and needed treatment. Atisha then told him Larianne planned to reveal the truth about her excess power and asked what she should do. Cayenne said that if that happened, even throwing Larianne Hines out would be risky. If the truth got out before the date, the wedding might be canceled. Atisha thought Cyrillez might oppose it too, since she wanted the Duke to have a proper life partner. She asked what they could do now, and Cayenne bent down and took her hand. He slid the ring back onto her finger. Atisha had completely forgotten about it because of her sister. Then the Duke asked Atisha to marry him. She blinked and asked what he meant. Wasn't that already decided? He explained that they would go to Wintel Castle's cathedral and marry there at once. Once the marriage was done, it couldn't be undone. He said that after Lady Atisha became his wife, nothing else would matter. But first, he needed to treat her hand. She insisted she was fine, then waved it and cried out in pain. Cayenne told Atisha to take better care of herself and reached for peroxide and bandages from the nightstand. The Duke bandaged her hand, thinking he didn't even know when he had started caring so much about Lady Atisha's safety and health. He only hoped she wouldn't be hurt or sick and that she could live in peace. Atisha thanked him for caring for her and said she kept saying it's okay out of habit. Atisha L. added that Duke Cayenne really was a good man. He answered that he would try to become someone she could remember as good. He said he was surrounded by dangerous enemies, and on the battlefield there was no time to worry about being noble. If he had become a better man, it was because he wanted Atisha to guide him that way. Cayenne asked if the bandage was too tight. She said it was fine and suggested they go to the cathedral now. Standing in the cathedral, Atisha thought about how in the Empire, a marriage wasn't truly recognized until the husband and wife spoke their vows. Once they said them, she and the Duke would officially be husband and wife, and she would become Atisha Wintel. Cayenne told her that if she didn't want this, they could stop. Atisha said that wasn't it. She asked if he truly saw no problem with this. Did he really want the wedding? Cayenne replied that he truly wanted to marry her. Atisha said she wanted it too. She really did. With the blessing of his father and mother, Cayenne Wintel declared that he would marry Atisha L. and stay faithful and honest as her husband. Then Atisha L., with the blessing of her father and mother, accepted Cayenne Wintel and vowed to keep trust and loyalty as his wife. After that, he said they had to seal the oath with a kiss, and Atisha blushed. The Duke gently drew her closer, and Atisha thought he had skipped other formal steps. But before she could say anything, Cayenne kissed her softly. Okay, and that's where we're stopping for today. And honestly, I am not okay. I genuinely feel like someone just paused a movie right when it was getting to the best part, because that's literally what happened. Girl, I need to talk about this because I have so many feelings. Atisha walked into that ball ready to basically negotiate her own death, and somehow that turned into the most tender, slow-burn romance I've read in a while. The way Cayenne went from this cold, untouchable Duke to literally bandaging her hand and saying he wanted to be a better man because of her? I'm sorry, I don't make the rules. That is husband behavior. I can't wait to have more of this too. Anyway, the manhwa is called Since My Time is Limited. I'm entering a contract marriage, and I covered all 39 chapters available right now. The moment more chapters drop, I am running back here to make part 2, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like. It really helps the channel so much. Kisses and see you next time.